Welcome, worldographers and world builders alike, to episode 12 of the World Hammer, where I read lore from across the multiverse and perhaps yours. All the entries seen here are submitted by talented writers from our Atovia Discord community based on a daily prompt project called Build Together and tagged for World Hammer. If you would like your own works read aloud, you are not only welcome but encouraged to join our Discord and submit your own. Now back to the Forge to see what's been built. Now, I did miss not an entire entry, but the last two images of a submission from LostInEternity. I'm not sure how I did this, but I do apologize. So I have put the full entry once again at the beginning of this episode, and that was from day 458, where the prompt was, bees. Do you have bees in your setting? Why not the bee if no? Is different than bee? And this came from Prevalent the Great in the Discord. LostInEternity wrote, bees and moon beasts. You ask why we keep bees. Hava Kismis. A good question. Better than asking only why bees make honey. Honey is useful, yes. It is food, medicine, and trade. Wax is useful too. That is not the whole matter. The bee is one of the Moon Mother's oldest teachings. Before the Manakasvoinenku, the many-faced moon, what others called the manifold moon, Uinuva Kutar, gave bees to the world. This was before the harvest face was named, before the full ordering of fields and planting days. She did not give bees as pets. Do not try to make pets of them. Also do not chase them. Bainetsuret, little wolves. They will sting you, and then you will complain, and I will ask whether the bee invited your hand. It did not. Bees teach 3 things. First, sweetness requires work. The bee visits the flower, gathers, returns, and works again. That is all. There is no trick. A full comb does not appear because someone wished for honey. It appears because many small tasks were done correctly many times. This is why I make you copy letters more than once. No, Eirik, that was not an invitation to sigh. Second, a household must be told what happens in it. In Johannes, when someone is born, we tell the bees. When someone dies, we tell the bees. When there is a marriage, we tell the bees and give honey and wax. Some say the bees leave if they are not told. I do not know if that is always true, but it is a good rule. A household that hides its grief and joy from the things that help it live is already becoming careless. Third, wax gives clean light. The shrine candle begins with bees, not only with flame, with bees, flowers, hands, and time. This is why even the temples of Luminism remember bee wax, though some of them remember it very quietly. Before the torch, there was the candle. Before the candle, the comb. Before the comb, Oinuva Kutar's small golden children. That is an old saying. I did not make it. Mine would be worse. Here in Ulfheimer, Weiser teaches you how not to die when the snow closes the road. This is a holy teaching. Eki glema vai. Do not forget it. You must know how to mend a boot, read weather, keep a blade clean, share fire, and come home with all your fingers. Oinuva teaches what comes after survival. Counting, reading, brewing, storing, measuring, planting, weaving, household rights, the management of food, wax, cloth, ink, and debt. These are not softer lessons, they are different lessons. A people who can survive winter but cannot count grain will still starve. A people who can hunt but cannot teach children will still become poor. So when I teach letters, I am teaching you a tool. When I teach numbers, I am teaching you another tool. When I teach beekeeping, I am teaching you food, wax, patience, and how not to move like a fool near small, armed creatures. Bees are like... No, that comparison is not useful. Bees are bees. Watch them carefully. That is enough. Now, istuka alas. Sit down. Open the little green books. Carefully, please. Books are not cheap here. You know this because I tell you every week. And Johannes, we have more of them, yes, but they do not crawl into my bag by themselves. Someone must prepare the skins, cut the pages, mix the ink, rule the lines, copy the words, bind the covers, and then carry the finished book over roads that would rather break your ankles. So when I ask you to wash your hands before touching a book, I'm not being severe for pleasure. I'm asking you to respect labor. The printed books from the southern cities are clever things, fast things. I do not dislike them. I only dislike their cost. Until Ulfheimer has presses of its own, my hand is cheaper than a merchant's pride. We will read the hive passages first. Then you will copy the names of the parts. Queen, worker, drone, comb, wax, brood, frame, hive box. After that, we will count the cells in the drawing. No, not all of them. I am not cruel. Only the marked row. Then, when we go outside, no one will put fingers near the frames unless I say so. Actually, there's one more matter, since someone will ask if I do not say it first. Moon beasts. Some of your grandparents call them bloom beasts. That is not wrong. Names change by region. In Johannes, we usually say Kun Karhu Mechelainen in old lessons, though that is a clumsy name and not one I like. Still, old names are often clumsy because they were made by frightened people trying to be accurate. They are not ordinary bees. Do not laugh. I say this because every year one child thinks large bee means bee I can understand, only larger. No. A wolf and a house dog both have teeth. You do not treat them the same. Moon beasts are wingless, larger than cattle, and they travel as if one body can be a hive. They do not keep to one box or one tree. They roam. Their bodies carry wax, brood, scent, and warmth. Where they pass, flowers wake early. Grass breaks through frost. Buds open when they should still be sleeping. This is why people call them envoys of spring. That is a poetic title. I did not make it. Some say EclipsEternal made them directly, before the many-faced moon, and that they are the elder siblings of hive bees. Some say they were ordinary bees changed by the harvest face, blessed so strongly by moonlight that they became walking hives. That is the teaching most shrine families prefer. Scholars from less polite schools sometimes say they are mutations, eldritch ones. They point to their size, their wrongness, their lack of wings, their effect on winter soil, and they say, this is not blessing, this is alteration. Maybe. I do not know. I am your teacher, not a liar. There are questions I cannot answer. What I can tell you is this. When a moon beast passes near a village, people do not hunt it. They do not follow too closely. They set out bowls of watered honey, salt, and clean snowmelt. They keep dogs indoors. They keep children farther indoors. Then they watch the ground after it leaves. If green comes, they give thanks. If flowers come, they mark the day. If nothing comes, they still give thanks because nothing terrible happened. There are fewer now than there were in the old accounts. Much fewer. Some say they withdrew when people stopped treating spring as sacred and began treating it as expected. Some say hunters killed too many for wax and heart honey. Some say the world is simply poorer than it was. Do not write that last sentence down. It is too sad for your copybooks. Write this instead. Moon beasts are rare, sacred bee-kin associated with EclipsEternal, winter blooming, and the return of life. They are not to be approached without an elder, priest, or trained keeper. Underline not twice. No, Eirik, 3 times for you. Remember this, children. The bee is small but not lesser. A people who forgets small, sacred things will lose larger ones soon after. Man, I really don't know how I missed the whole thing, considering the fact that we didn't read at all about moon beasts in the original reading of this last episode. Don't know why that didn't trigger something in my brain to go double check, but either way, really love the full entry here. This school teacher motif that's going on is really, really well done, delivered great. Like I said last time, I love this look and sort of depiction of oral, cultural, ideological histories and stories that set up really important things in society, like caring for your bees and also being careful of these very large moon beasts, which, very cool idea. I love these huge bee-like creatures. I would really love to see a picture of these because I have some stuff in my head and I don't think it's quite right. Now for the beginning of the prompts included in episode 12, we'll start with day 467 where the prompt was, what is a famous love story in your world? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Bulbman 5000 writes, Ancient Lovers. Eons and eons ago, Seroth was ruler of a barren world. Life was almost non-existent upon the surface of her planetary form as her stars, her suns, cast their light upon her. But still, her loneliness was crushing, leaving her darkened and quiet until one day something emerged from the largest sun, a thing she did not recognize. Light condensed and shaped into scales, fire became life and color upon this newcomer, and suddenly Seroth wasn't alone. And so came her first love, the dragon god Angarkos. Together they truly created life upon the planet, her capacity for creation paired with his light, and then they enjoyed each other. They sired the dragon species, and Garkos, their divine father, Seroth, their divine mother. The first few generations of the dragon species were the divine guardians of the living, and all was well for many eons. But now Angarkos is dead, having died at a broken heart due to the sinner dragon's genocide of Laran, and now the Holy Mother Seroth is broken. Though children, the dragons, now are lost without something to guide them. I don't remember what the story was called, but I remember the one in which Seroth is basically tortured as a human, if I'm placing these characters correctly. Very dark stuff. I really do like the sort of broken, the sort of like beautiful world before idea and the broken after that Bulbman has had kind of going here. That the gods that created everything are either dead or messed up, which we have a lot of dead gods going on, and they're always fun, and I think this is a pretty good take on that. Nugget writes, the beginning of the end, an entry in Petrichor. Edward approached the gate outside of a large manor. It belonged to some noble family, though he didn't particularly care which one. He tossed his violin case over, giving a sharp whistle to prevent it from hitting the ground before he jumped up to climb the fence manually himself. And then he snuck inside. With Thaddeus's leg broken, he was on his own for now. Thaddeus probably wouldn't have approved of something like this, but that hardly mattered now. Now, a team of one needing to provide for both, he had to do something bigger. The family was hosting a large gala, the type he and Thaddeus were often nauseated by, the type where they eat snails with tiny forks that somehow costed more than a year of rent while people like him starved. But this would work in his favor today. He walked with confidence, in the nicest suit he had access to, as if he were a hired musician, and even made some pleasant conversation with the guests at the event. It was not pleasant conversation. No, what he was doing was talking to and distracting them while he unclipped pearl bracelets or held on a bit too long to rings with a smile on his face like nothing was the matter. What he was doing was sliding every silver spoon he could find into his pocket or grabbing expensive-looking decorations no one would notice were gone. That's what he was doing. That's why he was here. He and Thaddeus needed food and money, and with Thaddeus's leg messed up, he had to do so on his own. Besides, people like this had more money than the avarice. They wouldn't even notice it was gone. He eventually peeled away from the event before too many people took notice of his presence. He wanted to blend into the crowd, not become the focus. Then he ran the risk of being questioned. Manners like this really are massive, aren't they? Edward felt he was already lost, and he only just... Where was he? He managed to worm his way to a door that seemed to lead outside. Alas, it was a greenhouse, a very nice greenhouse, but not the way he came in. Still, he figured it was nice enough to stay in briefly, to quite literally stop to smell the roses. "Who are you?" a voice asked. Edward was sure he was alone, but yet the speaker was still enough. He practically blended in. Apologies, I didn't see you there. My name is Edward." He bowed as he said this. "Edward who?" "I am simply Edward, monsieur, and I am simply at your service." "What are you doing here, simply Edward?" "I could ask the same of you, monsieur Ambrosius." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ambrosius. My name is Edward." He held out his hand for Ambrosius to take. "So you've said." He very lightly took the very fingertips of Edward's hand and very gingerly took it. "Oh, I did, oui. Apologies. I'm a little absent-minded, or so I've been told. Anyway, I have trouble agreeing with that personally. Truth be told, my mind is often swimming so heavily with ideas, I would hardly consider myself absent-minded. You talk a lot, don't you?" "So I am told," Edward chuckled. "Do you like roses?" "Pardon?" "You look like someone who likes roses. I mean, it's right there in your name, Ambrosius." Want to see something?" Before even waiting for a response, Edward began to hum and sing. The plants around him seemed to flourish as he did so. He cupped his hands and opened them to reveal a simple red rose which he put into Ambrosius's hair. "There you go," Edward said cheerily. Ambrosius gave little visible response. "Merci," he muttered after several seconds. "It suits you." Ambrosius began a coughing fit, doubling over as he did so. When his hand came away, it was covered in blood. "Ambrosius, are you all right? I heard that there was some kind of sickness going around. I didn't think it had traveled this far up." "It's fine. Nothing I am not used to." "Are you sure? I can come back. Bring you some soup if you like. I know of a soup so good it can cure plague. Well, okay, not literally, but it should make you feel better at least." "That's not necessary of you." "No, I insist. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to see you again." Edward seemed to stagger slightly, hand over his stomach. Are you hungry? Ambrosius asked. Nothing I'm not used to, monsieur. Ambrosius stood up and walked over to an apple tree in the middle of the garden with a sign reading, "Do not touch," and reached upwards to pull a fruit down from it. Are you sure you should be giving me some from that? Edward asked, seeing the sign. My father won't mind. Edward took the apple from Ambrose's hand and bit into the forbidden fruit, juice dripping down his lips and chin. Merci, monsieur. Don't mention it. I suppose I should take my leave now. Would you know where the entrance is? The place is rather hard to navigate. Ambrosius silently pointed down towards the hallway Edward was looking for. Merci, Rose. He began to leave, but poked his head back in to make one last comment. You don't talk much. I like you. And they parted ways, as Edwards skipped merrily down the damp and wet streets of Upper Petrichor to meet back up with Thaddeus. It hit him who he was talking to. Oh, man, that was Ambrosius Lockhart. And he was smitten. Okay, cool. We get the first meeting between these two, which, I hadn't really thought about the fact that we didn't have that yet. So this is a fun little thing for us to finally get, and a perfect prompt for it. For day 468, the prompt was, does anyone have an animal that should be anything except a pet, but they keep it as a pet? And this comes from Pro and the Great in the Discord. Tex writes, animals that should not be kept as pets in the Watcher's War. Despite being a house cat in size, manticores are the apex predators on Lemuria. They're also covered in hairs like a tarantula that act as an irritant and gave spikes on their tails that are a potent paralytic with which they use to hunt. On top of that, they are still cats with claws and fangs and exceptional reflexes. However, despite this, Daisy the Manticore is adopted by Tink, a previous incarnation of Katie, and later summoned by Reed. Now, a longer entry was also linked underneath this, which I'm assuming will have to do with what we already read, and so I'm going to read that next. She was a content cat. She enjoyed living amongst the trees, hunting squirrels and avoiding the obnoxious tramp of the strange, tall, pointed-ear things that prowled around the forest. She had no name, nor any need for one. Yes, life was good. Yawning, she stretched along the thick, rough branch, her claws keening from her paws as she arched her back. This little nook was perfect. Perfect to hunt from, but most importantly perfect to rest on. The way the beams of early morning sunlight caressed her wings was delightful. The raised knot of the tree branch was ideal for wrapping her spiky tail around as she slept. It truly was perfect for a cat like her. As she cleaned her paws, she wondered what she was going to do today. Was she hungry? Thirsty? Bored? She debated, just curling back up for another nap when one of the pointy-eared giants made eye contact with her. Go away, she hissed, baring her fangs and pressing her ears flat against her head. The creature saw she was in no mood to deal with it and decided to leave her be. A wise decision. The pointed-eared creatures were ugly. They had no claws, no fur, no tails, and no wings. They were too loud when they hunted. Like children, they broke every twig and leaf in their path. Sighing, she decided she was thirsty. Maybe she could upset one of the giants in the process. She purred at the prospect. Oh, that would be delightful. Her spiky tail unfurled from the branch, and with one final stretch, she leapt down from the tree. She unfurled her wings, and a tiny gust tousled the fine hairs on them as it gently drifted her to the small pond below. After checking to see if it was safe, she dipped her head low to drink from the cool water. It was smooth against her rough tongue. She was glad it wasn't mating season. This would be the perfect opportunity to pounce on her from above in an attempt to wrestle her into submission. It wasn't that she disliked her kind, of course. They were tolerable enough. She was just a solitary creature. Not to mention, other cats thought that they were perfect. She, on the other hand, knew that she was. And the males were worse about it. They already were preening fools, but the posturing was worse during mating season. But wait. Her ear twitched in the direction of that sound, a strange, high-pitched hum, and she stopped the drinking, tentatively gauging her surroundings. What was that? Quietly, she followed the hum. It led her to another giant. This one was glowing purples and violets, and its ears were not pointy. Who dared to interrupt her drinking, she seethed, her tail twitching in annoyance, before calming slightly. She supposed the purple giant could have interrupted her nap. The creature turned from where it sat by the fire and saw her. It smiled. Hi there, little one, it crooned. Psst, psst, psst. She stared blankly, in reply, unamused. She was a noble hunter. How dare the giant make such gestures? I've got some fish for you, pretty kitty. Want some fish? Well, that changes things. She cocked her head, her tail twitching in confused amusement. So this purple giant is just a moron then. Who in their right mind would just give away food? Carefully, she moved closer to chew on the piece of fatty fish that the purple one had offered. After all, unlike this giant, she wasn't stupid, and it would be stupid to turn down free food. A hand stroked her back and stopped to stare at the giant. Certainly it felt nice, but it was crossing a line. The purple giant stopped, and she decided to continue eating the fish. When she was finished, she licked her lips and decided she wanted more of those pets that the purple giant had given. She waited, desperately trying to get the giant's attention. She was getting annoyed and her tail twitched. Ah, was it stupid? Meow, she cursed in the old speech used to teach the youth, and the giant smiled at her, giving her more pets. Stupid then, she purred. But that was fine. The giant had given her proper tribute. She'd have to follow for more. I'm trying to think if we've had another entry that really had a animal perspective like this. We've had animals that are just considered naturally sapient in their world, like, especially anthropomorphic versions, but one where you aren't certain whether or not the animal is as sapient as the other creatures and you're getting its perspective. I don't know if we've had, and this was really, really solid take on that. I feel like it was a relatively easy flow for me to get into, to read this in a way that I felt was solid. It's a great entry text. I had a lot of fun reading this, especially as an owner of 2 cats myself. Bulbman 5000 writes, a dangerous pet. Cathode beetles are oftentimes a pet for several different civilizations, even if they probably shouldn't be. Cathode beetles are herbivorous insects that tend to eat the leaves of numerous different plant species, measuring at 6 to 10 pounds and roughly 12 inches on average. Their shell bears a remarkable light blue coloration with a dull brown for its legs, and at the edges of its wings, usually docile. Their behaviors and care can be a bit odd, even by insect standards. Cathode beetles tend to linger around gemstones charged with the lightning element and tend to congregate on large rocks or on treetops during lightning storms. Many scientists have theorized that this leads to their peculiar power, but even isolated specimens are still capable of the defense mechanism that gave them their name. Cathode beetles can channel electricity, typically through the aforementioned gemstones or by quite literally drawing it from the atmosphere, allowing them to open their wings and fire a small lightning bolt from a protrusion between their wings that is usually nestled in quite cleanly when their wings are closed. Because of this, many have warned that keeping them as pets is a profoundly stupid idea, but many find their rather round shape, coloration, and chirping noises rather cute, leaving several species to adopt them as pets. Except the Fungora. As the Fungora have literal trees and plants as their buildings, they are very picky about what herbivorous creatures they keep in their presence, and have found the cathode beetles to be a bit of a pest, but one they still relocate, rather than kill. Lastly, the cathode beetles have been found to be hilariously effective against the predominantly mechanical mutant scourge monsters, as the lightning bolts from their beetles tend to short-circuit the technology bound to their flesh, leaving them little more than a twitching heap of human flesh. This tactic was how the Ursine race, the Uran, saved their homeland from a horde of mutant scourge, led by a particular scourge beast, the Seraphim of Exploitation, during what is now known as the Steel Limb Siege. Though the living factory was strong, even it had a surprising weakness to the electricity of the large collective of cathode beetles the Uran gathered. All but the Seraphim were destroyed as the living factory escaped after destroying the remnants of its own invasion force and fleeing amidst the smoke, all to the dismay of the spiritualists who had hoped to rob the patriarch of one of his stronger abominations. I like the dimensions. It actually gave me a pretty good idea here of how big this thing would be. That's a scary size for a beetle. Kind of a cool size for a beetle, but it's a scary size, especially for something that can shoot electricity. I think I'll stick to my cats. Kendamarania writes, The White Stag of the Forest, an entry in Return to Faelund. Kendamarania notes at the top, a bit more practice in trying to hone in on Faelund's writing style, starting to really pay attention to sentence variation and archaisms. The proper entry begins now. At the break of twilight, soon as the sun was setting, Galaric made his trek back through the Elfin Valley. He carried with him 2 baskets full of fresh fish, berries, and wild parsnip foraged in the forests, fit for a meal meant for himself, as he had no one else to serve to in the desolate palace of Alphame. Following the Mothram birds home to the obscure Jade City, the elf could hear the creatures of the Vale murmur amongst themselves of the happenings outside the forest. Terrible war and pestilence writhing Faelund. Galaric couldn't pay much mind to it. He had to return home. That was, until his ears were pierced by the bellowing moan of a distant creature. He could see all the Mothrams flock away as he continued on deep in the wood. Further on, it cried in pain while the animals fled. Galaric immediately rushed over to where the sound was, following its winces and pleas through the bramble. The woodland's animal residents ran the opposite way of him, rushing as the noises grew louder while they exclaimed to each other, "Flee, fly! The toy soldiers are approaching!" When Galaric came upon the creek, ushered by a scattered light, he saw it. A great white stag with tree leaves all over its antlers and a red mane. A Cernos, the elven records would call it. Wild, graceful creatures of the Vale that never stepped out of the elven realm, their leaves changing to the seasons like trees. This one had its hind legs bleeding out to the stream, paralyzed and unable to move. Galaric immediately rushed over to it, setting beside his baskets and tending its wound on the thigh. "Thank goodness it's only the legs. Pray tell, are you sapient?" The Cernos only nodded in response. "Hurts," it muttered in a low voice. "They got me good, methinks. Off guard while I was grazing the leaves." "Who is they? Who did this to you?" he demanded. The elf began to tend its wounds, stabilizing its breath as he inspected the puncture, which was scarcely any bigger than a fingernail. "Witches' work." The stag shook his head. "The wooden men with their wind-up rifles ambushed me, wishing to fix my head upon their master's halls. They had already hunted 4 of my brethren for sport." Galaric could see the bullet wound lodged inside its musculature, likely several inches too deep for him to recover without special tools, but not impossible without the clever use of magic. His middle finger already had a gemstone ring to channel it out. The thought worried him, though. He never tried healing a live organism before, especially one under distress, but the possibility of this Cernos bleeding out was too great of a risk to leave out. Thus, he pointed his hand towards the wound and channeled the gem's will, his vision blurring and the finger beginning to sear as it gradually lifted the iron bullet out. The stag winced and whined, trying to kick back its legs with what strength it had left. "Pestal, be still, little one," Galaric corrected himself, patting its back as he felt his mind slur with magical influence. With a silent clink, the bullet wriggled itself out of the stag's body and onto the dirt. Much better, is it not?" Galaric lightly smiled, rubbing the back of the Cernos' neck for its effort. "I have healing instruments and medicine in Alphame, if you would allow me to take you there." "So my theory was correct, then. You are an elf," the Cernos exclaimed with delight. "I had thought they all left, or were raided by the witches as rumored by the birds and insects. Are you their only survivor, then? There be one else to reign over?" "I prefer to think myself as their groundskeeper, really," Galaric muttered, glancing back at the foothill fog. "I was just about to journey home. However, I got called by the disturbance you caused amongst the woodland residents." "I'm terribly sorry for that." The stag bowed its head in shame. "But I love to accompany you further on. I believe my brethren may have all fled away from the Vale, as it is no longer safe for creatures like us to wander further out. If you need help with the palace as well, I can help anon. Pray tell, however, do not consider me a pet, yes? I have heard tales of my kind being domesticated by goblins and snurgs." "Peace, peace. I believe you are getting ahead of yourself with that," Galaric chuckled, slinging the Cernos' heavy body with minimal effort. He fed some of his forage berries to it as he crossed the stream back home towards the dark forest and headed to the Emerald Palace. "I believe we have room for you in the city. Would you happen to have a name as well?" he asked. "Lotharim," he answered. "Where will my bed be?" Will we be sleeping together, or will I be resting in the stables?" And Lotharim babbled on, before being silenced by Galaric. "You will see once we get there. For now, we still have to heal your legs back up and make haste before the witch's constructs spot us." He scratched his chin. "Do you fancy fish and parsnips for dinner?" Lotharim answered, "Nay, but I would love to try the fabled embered trees in the elven gardens high above. Crows and eagles were gossiping amongst themselves about that." Galaric turned to fool laughter that echoed through the trees. "Alas, we do. Plenty to share for our new resident." I've grown steadily curious in the witch's story here a little bit, and I think that Kendamarania has given us some background, but I think it would be fun to see an entry from their perspective potentially, or just a little bit more about what's going on there. I know that their theme is that they are effectively using magic for the sake of power, attempting to tame it, as it were, which harms it. And Feilun, I think, at the same time was kind of like the big major takeaway from that. And I'm also fascinated where this kind of is in our Feilund timeline. Like, when did the witches start taking over with toy soldiers? Is this like sort of before or after the clockwork dragons become like ancient things? I think this is a long time ago, because if I remember correctly, Galaric's whole story is supposed to be set pretty distant past. But I'm still trying to piece these things together. Nugget writes, squints at piece of paper. Oh no. An entry in Time Traveler and the Immortal. So you're what? Aurelius's pet? His what? Beg pardon. I must have misread your relationship. His what? An interaction between Moores and Victor early into their introductions. Humans are adorable. Have you ever noticed that? With their little emotions, their passions, their hobbies, and their little quirks. They have an entire day where they celebrate their fellow humans just for being born. Adorable. It's no wonder the gods are fond of adopting them at times. They find a cute human they find endearing, entertaining, or even just useful, and take them. What this entails depends on the god. Some are seen more like companions on as much of a one-to-one level as a god and human could achieve. Some are just actually treated like pets and kept because they're cute and it's a sign of status. Some treat them as advisors or even jesters. Some basically use them as servants, but regardless, they are given food, shelter, and care in exchange for their companionship and usually live in the astral plane with their owner. Ever since the war, the practice of adopting human pets has become practically non-existent. Most of the gods are dead, and even those who aren't are not ones to risk angering humanity further for their frivolities. The main exception to this would be Victor, who is regularly referred to or mistaken as Aurelius's pet. A misunderstanding that Emrys never corrects. This makes sense, according to Emrys's ego, that this would not necessarily be a negative connotation to have Victor as a pet, especially if it used to also be seen as sort of a status symbol, so there you go. For day 469, the prompt was, what are some locations in your world that are cultural melting pots for different types of people? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Bulbman5000 writes, Olden times. In the old days of the Loran kingdom, in its prime, when its king was kind and sought only to bring joy and prosperity to others, Loran was a true melting pot. The Beastkin demonstrated their shape-shifting powers to the wonderment of the kingdom's visitors. The other races descended from mankind had sacred grounds within the kingdom's territory. The warrior race, the Uran, fought with Beastkin warriors in sparring matches purely for the fun of it. The Onik worked with the Beastkin scientists and mechanics to forge the old Gemtech and Necro machines. Even the dragons during those days came and enjoyed the numerous festivities of the Old Kingdom as best they could. But even then, Chthonius the Steel Drake, who would later be known as the Sinner Dragon, was suspicious of Loran. Paranoia was oft considered his weakness amongst his draconic kin. Oh, how he would have gloated after his genocidal rampage had his actions not led to the heartbroken death of his kind's god. Now many civilizations ache for the joy experienced in those old days as the curse that gripped the Old Kingdom made it nigh impossible for others to settle there. That was until 8 champions came with their forlorn peoples and broke the curse with their combined might. These 8 champions, I think, are individuals we've seen before. I do not remember them well, though, unfortunately. And I also don't think that they were players. Bulbman, of course, can correct me if I'm wrong. Keep on getting this theme of a world that used to be better and a world that is worse now. I'm curious where Bulbman, if this is simply the overarching theme that Bulbman wants for the setting in general, or if there is a conclusion at the end of this theme. Because oftentimes with the TTRPG, we don't really get a conclusion to the primary theme of the setting, because that is the interesting driving force for players within that world. Tex writes, Takuma Gahara. Takuma Gahara is unique on Atlan for being powered exclusively by ionized ectoplasm. The power plant at the center of the city, in what would be the Imperial Palace in Tokyo in our world, is the beating heart of the city and helps to create a unique blend of how powered but extremely efficient machinery, because ectoplasm is a substance that can only be created by binding the soul of the dead and prohibiting them from entering the afterlife. As a result of this, and also due to their exclusive trade deal with the Republic of Tejas, Takuma Gahara has the widest reach of any of the city-states and nations. Even amongst the baseline humans, we see people from the Chinese mainland, the British Isles, and so much more. There's some interesting grammar, and maybe there was just a typo that I missed. I tried to kind of reason out what it should have been in that second sentence. Couldn't quite figure it out, so sorry if some of the thought here didn't come across text, but I did do my best. The ectoplasm idea is really interesting. Would love to know more about that at some point in Atlan. Some kind of like industrial ghost operation, or maybe ectoplasm doesn't come from ghosts. I don't, could be from something else, retrieved from the afterlife or from another realm. Sounds interesting. The Wanderer writes, Athol, the capital of Athol, an entry in Endrin. To those with a good memory, they might recall the city of Athol. I've told tales of its founding Queen Calda, who killed a war god in order to save her people, but I have not told the tale of that city itself. Athol is a rather odd city in the way it formed. While most cities make their rise in a time of success, Athol was made during the Spell Wars. Two large arcane factions had declared war on each other and in an arms race accidentally wiped themselves out and decimated the local populations. Furthermore, the amount of arcane monsters they made for their war started a few decades of calamity. The Mad Queen Calda was a slave at the start and broke herself and a large group of slaves out. They escaped into the wilderness and started a village they called Athol. Now, beginning as a band of slaves, they were already a diverse population. Its citizens encompassed nearly every demographic within thousands of miles. The initial leading demographic was Silkian, the founder herself being one. Silkians were a very hated group by powerful factions due to a very annoying cultural trait. They are very diligent historians. Silkians, some exceptions exist, obviously, strongly believe in making reliable and accurate histories, even when the local powers at B don't like the accurate portrayals. As such, quite often suppressing and enslaving them whenever possible. As such, when Athol was founded, it had three core principles. First was helping the community, looking out for each other and surviving. Second was being eternally vigilant against the all-surrounding threats. The third was that no demographic would be turned away, only their actions alone would judge them. And suddenly, the surviving mages who were looking at mass unemployment and quite often mobs driving them out, or government executions, suddenly had a safe haven. Furthermore, Calda was relentless in her leading her outriders to hunt down the local monsters, so Athol and its surrounding area became a much safer area, especially since the outriders were on the outskirts of the fledgling city areas, not the center populace. With the mass amounts of mages now present, their city became a powerhouse at a time where most former superpowers were in a tattered, sorry state. Then Calda set her sights on Voshir, the cruel war god who had begun sustaining the war and the mass devastation. She challenged, and in a tale much prior given, slew him and ended that dark chapter of history. And suddenly, every weaker city-state, village, and town saw a city-state that could actually protect them, and it wasn't oppressive. They quickly joined Athol. By the time the Mad Queen of Athol, Calda, passed away, a city-state was a country with a diameter of 500 miles, and all without a single conquest war. Athol, over the next few hundred years, would both rebuild their city in fall. Voshir's death left the evacuated city in much of a crater. The primary city walls are built in a nonagon shape out of Monsilix-infused marble, making a wall that's almost impossible to breach. They lined their gate walls with thick rustless steel. An arcane school began there, the Aldaris College/Academy, and due to Athol having a significant portion of the remaining mages in the continent, they quickly became an academic and arcane superpower. For the average person, though, Athol is a bit different. The city proper, if unusually clean for a large city, it's filled with marble towers and has 3 walls, an inner one to the castle and the refuge. Next, an upper district as well as a market district, and outside of that a lower civilian district filled with houses, home gardens, and greenery. Though marble walls and Athol blue roofs are nearly universal throughout. The towering walls provide the city with a strong sense of security, but the overly friendly guards and open skies that are secured make a homely yet elegant city. It holds a strong blue dye throughout the city, as Athol is over a massive bedrock ground with large pockets of clay and lapis lazuli mixed, making a vibrant blue dye and ceramics easy, cost-effective, and makes Athol's colors striking compared to everyone else. Athol blue is found in nearly a quarter of the city's civilian exports. The massive clay deposits also made making large underground structures quite feasible, and truthfully, the city might have more space underground than above. Most buildings have large underground cellars. Some wealthier individuals have entire mansions underground with just a surface garden. The government buildings have large community centers, amphitheaters, and the whatnot, submerged beneath the hard earth with just the window lights allowing for the sky to be seen. Though, after all these long centuries, despite immaculate record-keeping, no single individual quite has the entire underground of Athol mapped out, and that's not including any secret rooms or access points built without city approval. Another thing Athol has become quite proficient in is the selling of a substance called chocolate. Benefiting from their temperate environment and the use of greenhouses, immigrants who took their native cacao plants with them have managed to thrive. Certain mages such as Isla and Apocaliton and the Archwizardess of the school has made a boiled sweet variant with a powdered cocoa mix with colony fruit juice quite popular. To close my tale here, Athol is a striving city, kept in check by immaculate records, a rotating nobility that prevents royal stagnation, and an entirely vigilant security has made Athol a long-lasting superpower in Endron. Its most prominent race, humans, only make about 35% of the population, and while not perfect, the city still stands strong. I feel like something I need to work on in a lot of my cities is what is this location best known for, and maybe give it a historical reason and a current reason. And I feel like The Wonder has done a really good job with both of those here. The historical reason being the fact that Athol constructed a nation just via its prowess, just via its goodness in a certain sense, and its reputation. But then its current reason it's well known is sort of sidebar chocolate, but more so the Athol Blue, which is a really, really cool concept. I like both of these ideas a lot, and I might steal this as kind of a method by which I'm going to end up building out my cities and just giving them just two little things that they're known for. And they can be very simple, and when I need more detail, I can spin off from there. Kendamarania writes, The ruins of Hjosalfam, an entry and return to Faelund. Hjosalfam, also known as the Marble City, was one of the other great elven cities in Faelund, situated on the western shores of the Merland Bay. Unlike its sister city Alphamay, Hjosalfam acted as a port town, connecting several trade routes established by the various Fae and attracting the brightest scholars around, interested in understanding magic's full capabilities and applications, as well as developing scientific fields like alchemy and medicine through contact with various lands. It was the most populated area in all of Faelund, hundreds of thousands of elves living in the marbled halls while the rest of the Fae visited to trade. When the wayward human Lysel first visited the city in 1115 EE, right at its golden age, it was described as a marvelous, shining city where scientific discovery met magic. Also, unlike Alphamay, it did not obey Prince Galaric's command for the elven cities to fly into the sky to escape the ensuing long fog and the witches' armies. Hjosalfam became one of the first targets of the witches when they tried to conquer the elven kingdom, primarily as a show of intimidation and strength with their construct armies, showing the elves had fallen and abandoned their land. They steamrolled through the Marble City, catching the guard completely off guard while they shelled out the walls and buildings. Countless lives were lost to their attack, while the remaining elves had to flee the city, leaving Hjosalfam almost completely empty. Meanwhile, the witches' constructs ransacked and looted their halls, discovering lost blueprints that could be repurposed for weapons, primarily the first concepts of fire lances. Over the decades of the long fog, the streets of Hjosalfam remained still and without life. Occasionally, mermaids would run through its canals and sewers to collect scrap and precious treasures, usually not staying for long. However, some mermaids would try and camp there permanently, primarily outlaws running from the Whale Kingdoms. Traveling goblin kith caravans and talking animal refugees would also come join the mermaids settled in the city. By 1165 EE, Hjosalfam began to be repopulated by survivors of the Long Fog, occupying a population of hundreds in a city meant for thousands. Like the days before the war, they intermingled and traded amongst each other, helping survive the relentless conflict that was occurring throughout the city. The echoes of the elves who lived before still harrow through the streets, however, strengthened by the city's connection to magic and its unwillingness to leave the dead in rest. There's always warnings to never wander the city at night, lest they witness Hjosalfam recollecting its past through wondrous dances and spirits that light the dark. I really like this bit of whimsical, very soft magic sort of hinting at something mysterious, spooky, the remnants of the thoughts of the elves still kind of haunting the streets of the city. I really like that we don't get much detail on that. It feels like a fairy tale book, which is, of course, Kendamarania's sort of attempted target theming here. For day 470, the prompt was, how is an unwieldy, dangerous, or otherwise significant object move through a populated area? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. Bulbman5000 writes, core relocation. Gemtech is a highly useful and highly dangerous form of technology. Many spiritualists often warn of the dangers of the elementally charged gemstones, and the engineers who invented Gemtech understood this as well, after learning the hard way. Now, however, 130 years after the technology's inception, Gemtech is practically everywhere, and advancements are highly sought after as there are many gemstones and many elements that could have all sorts of differing effects and applications if used in machinery. Large-scale machines are powered by specific devices called gem cores, and many of them are highly dangerous due to the large gemstone used as the power supply therein, but none are more dangerous than the typically ruby-powered cinder core. A moment of jostling too much or dropping it could cause a devastating explosion with its inherent fire magic. The cinder core is often used for things like heating for a town or as part of the heating system for multiple large-scale industrial furnaces. Many of the different civilizations have relocated the cinder core differently, from the Gathar and Uran who use specialized clasps to hold the cinder core and slowly move it, or perhaps the Beastkin who helped invent the cinder core, who also developed a special and fairly small vehicle to carry it around very slowly. Cinder cores are rarely used due to the time it takes to transport them, so most cinder cores get created right next to where they will be used, and even this is done very carefully because one wrong hit to the gemstone in about a 5-block in diameter radius will be instantly leveled. This is another really good example I hadn't thought of for this prompt because I had been thinking of, what sort of things qualify for this, and usually I was thinking something that needs to speedily move through an area or to get to some area, but also the incentive of power and technology is another great reason that something dangerous is moved through a populated area because, well, it needs to be used for that populated area, and I really like these Gemtech ideas. EclipsEternal writes, Corrupted Reality Anchor of Gravitos. The introduction to Act 2 sees Iris, Ira, and Auburn getting chased by the corrupted Archon of Gravitos. This scene ends with Iris casting an unstable spell on the vehicle's mounted cannon, destroying both the vehicle and the Archon. A corrupted relic as powerful as this can't be touched by anyone weaker than Hegemon class, and shouldn't be used by anyone weaker than Archon class. With few options, Iris pulls the power core from the destroyed vehicle. This power core is the Archon-class relic, the Creation Core. Using this, Iris creates a hive mind construct called Legion. Powered by the Creation Core, Legion sets out to return the reality anchor to a hegemon named the Timeless. There is a slight skip in time before Legion returns badly damaged with only one construct body remaining. Iris decommissions the construct and retrieves the Creation Core. This sets the scene for the Archon, Death, to attack and force Iris to corrupt the Creation Core into the vessel classic relic, Wings of Kamenos. Hopefully I got pronunciations on those correctly. Could we get a little bit of a breakdown of, I believe EclipsEternal is working on a book or a novel is what this sounds like, or maybe multiple. So we got kind of like a hint at what some of the scenes would entail. I like this. It's kind of a unique way to utilize a prompt. Pro the Great writes, Transit duty, an entry in What Lies West. He also quoted at the top, even a serious man can crack a joke every now and again. The crowd who fells beasts takes a deep sigh as the battering light of the tyrannical sun hammers down onto his scales. Thou art doing well, O mighty Wayfinder one. Ashkram, Gekrod's recorder and primary spellcaster, asks, Thou lookst to be lost both in thought and in direction, Wayfinder. I'm fine, just my feet are really starting to hurt. The sun's one thing, but this horrid sand is cooking through my soles. I feel like my feet are actually burning at the moment. Gekrod looks to Ashgram from the other side of the cart, moving between them. Ah, then lucky be us that the city is within a day's travel, at least according to Maka Verikrad's work. With luck, by sun's death we shall arrive, sound of mind and flesh once more. Gekrod grins slightly, though it's difficult to tell with his anatomy. Other lizard folk don't really do grins. Gekrod must be hanging around humans and the like too much. He turns to look at the carriage for a moment. If the solid silver construction wasn't obvious to its contents, then the purity seals and the prayers of safety from Orpheus would certainly give away the contents within. One male arcanosaur, 13 feet long, 9 feet tall, and 1/4 of a metric ton in weight. The beast is sleepless, even after ancients know how many days of this. Constant thrashing, roaring, screeching, and potentially even a few fireballs if the seals break. It was a right pain in the rear to pin the thing down. Luckily Ashkram is competent with a magic hand. I know this is real late to ask now, Ashkram. But what exactly does Emmerich want with this thing? It cannot in the slightest be anything good. That Conrad spawn even stooped low enough to ask us, lizard folk, to get one for him.
Would that I and you be permitted to know, Wayfinder mine, the verdant mage paid a particular premium for our discretion on the matter, and even more, filled our coin purse, asking for us not to ask such things, questions.
Ashcombe slows his speed slightly to fall in line with the carriage.
Fortunate, then, that he cannot hear us, and we may partake in the wonder of speculation, then be doled with boredom for rest of our trek. What would say you, Stormbringer?
Ashcombe turns to the carriage driver, Meryl, a catfolk woman, and looks expectingly. War, control, the burning of witches, who knows? Conrad brats are always up to something, and Emmerich is always up to even more than they are. If I had to place a bet, though, the former most option. Sucker's probably planning on conquering the North and earning his sweet papa's forgiveness for whatever it is he did. Meryl looks down with the conversation. Her fur does nothing to shield her from the heat, let alone the heat at the tyrant sun above. Ashcombe straightens up a bit before he talks.
Would that I had more information, but your theory has evidence. Circumstantial evidence, that is.
Ashcombe smiles as he looks at Meryl. She returns with a frustrated frown.
Mayhap the verdant mage wouldst only like for a companion. A fool, him, for thinking then that an Ignis Lacerta would make a fine pet, but alas, I am not coffered to offer advice, only a prize. Perchance then that the exile noble only wishes for an exotic meal.
Geekery scoffs. No way. He's passing us several hundred silvers just to bring him dinner. I think Meryl's got the right mindset. No way us giving him this will do anything good for Balfora. The Arcanosaur within the carriage hits a wall again, wailing in pain as the seals light up and burn the creature again and again. When will it learn that it isn't going anywhere? It keeps thrashing for several minutes before going silent again, if only to repeat the process in half an hour. Time passes on. The tyrant sun is near what can only be described as noon now, near the center of the sky, though every blink shifts its coordinates by miles. The creature has roused numerous times today. It seemed to be concerned with its proximity to the city of worms.
Ah!
Ashcombe lights up with relief at the sight on the horizon the worm scale reaches.
Alas, we have been a-roving for some time. To be within the sight of the skybreakers is to be relieved, to be at ease.
A short, quick hissing noise comes from up ahead. Geekery groans slightly as he unsheaths his sword. Staring at a patch of sand, he sees several beady black orbs peeking shyly out from the dunes. Reaper. Geekery holds his hand out to stop Meryl and the horses. I'll deal with the little pest. With a quiet movement, a large, scorpion-like creature ascends from the sands. Geekery twirls his falchion in his hand and strides confidently forwards. There's a time skip here, our little break. Great. Now Geekery has ironback blood all over his drawers. Sticky, smells like copper. Perfect. It's in his right boot now. Surprised it got up in the first place. Carrying around an Arcanosaur, you'd be inclined to assume we weren't going to see anything stupid enough to get in our way. What's that Reaper make, 12 now? Meryl chuckles. 14 if we were to count the Mire Hulk that tried dragging you to safety, Geekery. Hey, you said you wouldn't talk about that. I'm hurt. Truly.
Ashcombe thinks for a moment. 'Twould seem that instead of a predator, the beast of this land would instead sense a trapped piece of prey. Verily, they seem eager to attempt at its demise. Recall then that wormling that followed us twixt even the mighty boughs of the Titan trees.
Maybe, though I'm sure Wormling would easily make a meal out of even a healthy Arcanosaur.
True though that may be, my wayfinder, nevertheless it found us time and time again when otherwise it could not have. The Arcanosaur is hidden in scent, and it could not have heard it time and time again. Thus mayhap then that the West wants not for us to take its precious denizen.
The West isn't alive, Ashcombe. Not in a sapient way, at the very least. If anything's to blame for us being harassed, it would have to be the Annihilator.
Shut!
Meryl shouts out, throwing her metal flask at Geekery. No invoking that fiend while I'm with you, fork-tongue. I'll have none of that, thank you very much. Have Roosh protect me and all that music. Please, Geekery responds. It's not omniscient. Only the ancients and maybe the gods are. If you're so scared, why'd you even come?
It's not exactly a secret that the thing shows up every other day now.
Girls gotta get paid, right? I can't afford the ferry back to Koros, and I'm not gonna stoop back into crime. Though maybe once we deliver this pretty little prince, maybe I can afford to sit on my ass for a month or two. A lucky investment, and I can afford to leave you two to your monster hunting.
Ow, my feelings. I thought we were friends, Meryl.
Of course we are. But I'm not foolish enough to keep coming back out here until I die to some horrid freak or massive flying leviathan, let alone the Sun Scourge itself.
The Sun Scourge? You mean the Annihilator?
Hey, not funny.
Annihilator.
Stop!
Annihilator.
Cut it!
Halt! Ashcrom speaks above their childish banter.
The other two and their entourage do as he says without so much as a peep.
Doth thou feel the pressure now in the air? The sallow words beneath the soil? The acidic thoughts in the gaps between gales?
What? What are you talking about, Ashcrom? Meryl places her hands at her sides, ready to spring off if something happens. Crow chuckles slightly before the others join in as well. What? Meryl looks around confused. Oh, ha ha. Ashcrom stifles a laugh too before the group away to the city on the horizon. I enjoyed having a narrative piece that we got to sort of hear Ashcrom a bunch in. That was a good time. And I really liked this trio. The banter and the character situation here was really well done, Predwin. And we get a picture of sort of different philosophies even. There's actually some pretty solid depth here. You could tell the world building is right there at the forefront of your mind as you do this, because it feels like conversations that would be happening in these sort of circumstances. It's great stuff. For day 471, the prompt was, what is an unknowable force of nature in your world? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Tex writes, the Elder Nagramas. In the original Watchers War timeline, the first timeline to ever exist, there were certain Nagramas, or Watchers, who already existed as metaphysical concepts with no true tangible form like Edtha, death, Evol, love, and others, but after some many rewrites and timeline shenanigans, they exist as just primal forces of nature where their personifications are little more than myth, otherwise long forgotten by the universes at large. And then a small note from Tex at the bottom. Also, anything before the void spawned the first light, because that's literally before the Big Bang itself. Not going to stop Air Drip from trying, though. Interesting. Seems like those are some fundamental, maybe not gods even, but entities or forces of nature in a very fundamental sense. Kind of interesting stuff. I'd like to get to know more about some of these things in the world text. Maybe you'll have to find an excuse or a prompt or something to share a little bit more about this with us. Probably the Great writes, the here. He notes at the top, type of stuff that asks for your firstborn child. This is an entry in What Lies West. Walk twixt bramble and bow without guidance. Only when you trust the woods the most, or when you fear it more than anything else, that is when you would meet him. The Here. Resdal, who writes all, Recorder. The Here are enigmatic entities that are said to reside within large, uninhabited forests such as Molug's southern edges in Koros and the ever-ominous Blackwood of Balfora's north. There are many folktales around the Here, ranging from happy fairy tales to bitter sagas of heroes trying in vain to conquer forests only to end up hanging from trees with their innards splayed like ribbons at a carnival. Stories, the only real evidence of their existence, describe the Here as towering oaken creatures that walk without sound. Likening to an ant, the Here are said to hide amongst trees and wait for interlopers to draw near before silently reaching down and plucking them like a crop from the ground. The Here are known in lore to prey on wandering children particularly. It is said that the entities prefer the meat of innocents and perhaps may take interest in the flesh of virgins for that reason too. The Here have many stories surrounding children seeing another youth running into the forest, ushering them to follow behind. The child is lured into a meadow in which a Here waits to devour them. This fey-like behavior has led to many cultures seeing the Here as nothing short of evil creatures. In a handful of stories, a person survives an encounter with a Here by striking a deal with the entity, offering the monster their name in exchange for their life. A Here will gladly take such a transaction and will use their bound servant to lure in even more victims. According to legend, you can identify a person controlled by a Here by watching their behavior closely. They will allegedly avoid stepping on any plant life whenever possible, and will act violently if any around them trample any flowers or other such foliage. After the arrival to Balfora, the world seems to have dulled down on the folk tales and fae stories, with the Here being a long-lost memory nowadays. Folk are too concerned with the West to be making up monsters on their own. So I didn't actually talk about this much in the short form because I didn't have much time, but I did read this for the TikToks and Instagram shorts and YouTube shorts and stuff. And I don't know why this didn't occur to me, but the fact that this is one of the first monsters with any substantial writing in What Lies West that isn't really a creature of the West, or at least has not been recorded as a creature of the West, which would make sense why we got an entry from a recorder who writes all, and because it implies he is not strictly relegating his sort of field of expertise to the West, which you would assume most of the other recorders around him are doing. So kind of some cool little tidbits here, and I am kind of interested in what Predwin wants to do with this, or if it's just kind of a piece of supporting world building. Bulbman 5000 writes, The Slithering Ruler. The worm is one of Seroth's divine daughters, a minor god ruling over the deep. The worm's purpose is to ensure the deep continues its own function of connecting most of the land masses of the world together via a network of underground forests. Because of this unique environment, the deep houses all sorts of, frankly, quite alien life, from the Fungora at its surface level to the mycelial Serag variant deeper below to creatures such as the depth walkers, towering three-legged synapsids known for traversing the deep and eating choice fungal and moss growths from the tree bark and rocks. The worm's cult is also one of the only cults originating from Seroth that still survives. Its cultists are usually known for their gifts. The gifts of the worm are mutations. As they continue to worship her, they become stewards of her realm and all it connects to, mutating them into chimeric creatures many tend to find rather disturbing. Their leader, the shaman of the depths, is Kondrik, a man who has since become a creature between what he once was, a renowned scientist of the human-descending Sidra race and a wide variety of fungal growths. Though he can still speak, his words at times slur, as he feels what the mushrooms feel. He was one of the first to warn his homeland of the Scourge invasion, yet the king of Xenaheim did not listen to him, something all of that nation learned to regret. Now the worm waits. She waits and watches what is to come of Seroth. What is the scheme of the Patriarch, and what could these 8 little lives hope to achieve? I really do like very low-level or eldritch or unknowable entities or very primal entities just having very simple names like this sometimes. Like, the worm is evocative of all this imagery, yet the imagery is also sort of funly defied by the explanation of something that it could not really be encapsulated by the idea of a worm. It's great stuff. Nugget writes, The True Nature of the Gods, an entry in Petrichor. Edward and Ambrose lay in their bed, side by lamplight. Edward was reading, with a glass of wine in his hand to wind down for the day. Ambrose lay flat on his back beside him, arms crossed over as if he were in a morgue. Rain poured down the window. It was Petrichor after all. There was a storm tonight. The room periodically lit up, followed closely by piercing thunder, neither of which seemed of note to either of the men until Ambrose spoke up. How often do you think of the gods, about their screams? Edward perked up, looking at his husband, then to the window. Not as often as many do. I was not raised religious. I was raised to survive. Thaddeus, I take it? Who else? I mean, the church still affected us. It is Petrichor, after all, but I consider myself indifferent regarding the gods. The frenzied favors you. So I've been told. Ambrose thought for a moment. What do you think they think of us? The gods, I mean. Hard to say. No one's ever seen them. The church says they love us, that they wish to favor us, but know not the pain they inflict. That legend says they were once benevolent, but their grief for humanity caused them to forget who they are. Might be some of the old revolutionary in me, but I don't much care for what the church has to say. I've seen what they tell you. I see how much they've scarred you. I wouldn't give the clergy any thought if their interpretation of the gospel hurts you this much. You think the clergy is wrong? I think they are human, prone to bias and flaws in the nature of our own hearts as we all are. Perhaps that is why they mourn for us, or maybe they just hate us. What makes you say that? Look around you, Edward. Look how they cry. Look at the brink of ruin the city is constantly on. Look at how the decayed shows its love. Do we really trust the cathedral as the ark if the gods are trying to drown humanity for our sins? If they even know we're here. Oh? I mean, we don't know what they want. Maybe they want nothing.
Maybe what we see as their will is simply how they exist, how they roll in their sleep. Does a hurricane care if you pray to it? None. It's a mindless force of nature, and all that dictates what happens with it, whether you get out of the way or not. How ironic would it be if this were all for naught? What if the gods didn't exist? It's possible, I suppose. No one's ever seen them outside of dreams, which could be explained by how often we're taught about them. Maybe our family just has a genetic illness and you got a bad hand. Maybe my mind is similar. Maybe the world is just a dark and cruel place and we're desperate for some explanation. Maybe therein is just how things work. I don't know what to think of all that. All of this suffering we've lived through and caused, all in the name of gods who were never there. I suppose we'll never know for sure, will we? I suppose we won't. Edward placed his book on the bedside table and polished off the glass of wine. Right, I think I'm ready to turn in for the night. I love you, Rose. I love you too, dear. Edward turned the lamp off and rolled over to sleep, wrapping his arms around his beloved Rose as he did so. Ambrose did not fall asleep. For what if he never woke up? Instead, his attention turned to the window. The storm was still raging outside. Even now, he still thought about the last words of his father during weather like this. Do you hear them? Do you hear the gods? Do you hear their screams? I'm not gonna lie, I always get excited now for the Petrichor entries because I like the added ambiance and the edit afterwards, and I hope that that comes through as a positive thing for other listeners. You know, if things are too much or the sound is too much, let me know in comments or wherever. Come to the Discord, bug me about it. But I feel like in my head, while I read it too, I can kind of hear the soft or the loud rain and the lightning and just how that might impact this discussion. The kinds of things that bring about discussions of religion or gods or deities in human beings when they're just sitting there together. For day 472, the prompt was, is there a drug that makes you sick in your setting? And this comes from Pro and the Great in the Discord. Pro and the Great writes, Wretch, an entry in What Lies West. He also notes at the top, I thought it made more sense for a different character to talk about potions, and it helps break up my writing style I've fallen into with the main narrator. The proper entry begins now. Composition. 1 part skull of sliver. 2 parts vis of wee. 1 part drinking water. Wretch be a concoction more than a potion. 'Tis a vile brew that makes you do its namesake, buke your guts out. Now me knows that sounds right asinine. Twice someone e'er want to quash something vile. Well, you see, the brew sops magic out of you like no tomorrow. If you're feeling the effects of mutation, and you feel as if you're losing yourself, need simply slug it back, and wait a few seconds, then wham! All that troubles ye is a puddle of sick on the floor or dunes now. Maybe I should figure out something to make it taste a wee bit better. Sugar. Though only sugar you'd get around the West is thunder jam, and we know that'd only make it taste a bit worse. Anyway, I shall endeavour. I know fancy words, look at me, to find a suitable taste enhancer, whatso it's not as vile as 'tis for now. Even it's been a while and you want an updated recipe or what have you, you know damn well where to find me, O loyal customer. Seamus Cauldron, corner of Bregan Street in Onyx Archway. Be seeing you. I got a little bit of practice with that accent when I did this on the short form. Hopefully it came out even better this time. Sometimes I don't do a lot of rereads, if any, on an entire document because there is really not time for me to do so in the 2-week timeline that I have to record and edit everything. So sometimes you just get what you get. And halfway through there, I felt like I was losing it and then grabbed it back a little bit. But I do like this idea a lot. Talked about it already on the short form, like I said. But really enjoy the concept of taking something that's kind of familiar historically, ideas that people used to attempt to make themselves puke, especially in the upper class and rich echelon, to just be able to continue eating and turn that into a actual functional purpose is kind of interesting for a magical world where magic is kind of a corrupting and occasionally and maybe often a negative influence when it comes to What Lies West. Nugget writes, Poison, an entry in Petrichor. It's everywhere. The streets, the wells, the aquifers, the arroyos, the mills, it's in the entire water supply. At what point would the rain itself be poisoned? If there is one thing Petrichor has little shortage on, it's water. But that isn't true. Leading up to and following the death of Ambrosius Lockhart, there has been this spreading rot in the water supply made up of everything, it seems. It is a deep black in color, maybe a deep rusted red if spread apart on something white, and it is one of the most dangerous poisons petrichor has ever seen. Ambrose himself is fascinated with poisons. He always has been. After all, the difference between medicine and poison is the dose. His reasons for doing so, as a man afraid of death, are unknown, but after he started practicing necromancy, he began drinking from his collection of poison. Maybe to speed up the decay of his organs, to feel closer to his god, maybe as a way of proving to himself how immortal he was now, maybe his mind is just fully gone and this was the result. Either way, he is entirely immune, but the poison still mixes with the already rotting and diseased liquidations of his organs and the undead nature of his cursed flesh. It's to the point that Ambrose himself is innately toxic. His very blood, his very sludge-like remains are an entirely new poison in and of themselves, black in color, made of organic material, and everything else that is poisonous under the clouds mixed with the toxic mold and fungus that his body also grows and has a mind of its own under Ambrose's control. Ambrose is completely immune to poison now. Edward is resistant to it, on account of getting continuously microdosed on his husband's crime against nature of a bioweapon. He has a very high tolerance to poison, and even recently has a taste for it on account of Ambrose's extensive knowledge on the topic. A skill that became very useful when Edward became the target of several political murder attempts exploiting his reliance on wine. Most of the time, such attempts end with Edward knowing full well what is in the wine and continuing to drink it anyway with a smile on his face to be polite, much to the confused frustration of at least one other person in the room. If he's feeling particularly cheeky, he might even ask for more. After Ambrose died, his homemade poison began spreading rapidly throughout the city, taking with it the entire water supply. It grows and searches for more flesh and decay to bring back to the rotten soul at its center, and it's making everything in Petrichor sick as a result. The main thing that seems to have any sort of effect on it thus far is the sound of a violin, or that bright, angry ball of light resting behind the clouds. I really like this part of the Petrichor timeline, the very Resident Evil-esque part, and maybe that's where some of the inspiration, but it's big old living organic mass that is spreading through a whole city and decimating the population steadily is, man, one of the most freaky kind of apocalypses I think that we as humans have dreamt up, and it is compelling in that freakishness. For day 473, the prompt was, what were some migrations of people in your world? What caused it? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Bulbman 5000 writes, the dragon's sin. No, the dragon father Angarkos said with a thundering voice as his steel-skinned descendant Chthonius winced before raising his head again. But we can stop him. We can stop the Beastkin's king Thanatos from furthering his corruption of darkness if we just... Angarkos leaned forward, still scarred from his battle with the patriarch, staring down at the dragon. No, the old god roared as Chthonius was moved back a bit from the sheer wind of the giant dragon's breath. Very well, Chthonius said with thinly veiled rage as he leaves his god to his chamber. But this did not stop the arrogant dragon. Chthonius gathered dragons who believed him to be right, and together, as a colossal army, they flew to Loran to do their deed. But they were not as hidden as they thought. For other dragons, led by an elder known as Xanath the Mountain, headed to Loran and its neighbors ahead of Chthonius, and bit by bit ferried all the living that they could away from Loran and its neighbors, a migration so vast that much of life was saved from that place, as the fires of Chthonius and his followers burned the continent to ash. The Beastkin king burned amongst his palace. The forge matron whom prepared for this moment hid underground alongside the machinery and factory complexes. All watched in horror as the fires consumed the land and then the sky turned dark. The ocean turned black as pitch. As black rain began to fall, the spiritualists heard it. The dragons heard it. Seroth was crying, mourning the countless lives the other dragons couldn't save, mourning what her distant son had done. Wait, what? But I saved everything. I did the right thing. Chthonius roared to the blackened rain clouds as the rain intensified, hammering down like a barrage of hail rather than simply rain. Chthonius quickly heard the dragons around him realize what had happened, how terrible their mistake was, and they yelled in both words and draconic roar, their rage at Chthonius' arrogance. The steel dragon fled, flying as fast as he could to his divine father's den. Surely he would see his distant son's greatness, but he was met with tears, as his kind was in mourning, and Garkos, the dragon father, died of heartbreak at his children's sin. And so, as what could be saved was migrated as Chthonius fled for his life, his followers returned to the land they burned, and prayed for forgiveness. Where they stand now, petrified by the curse the patriarch laid upon the land. Thus was this day known as the dragon's sin. Thus was Chthonius known as the sinner dragon. I love these deeply somber pieces of mythology where arrogance and desire for things made right sort of couple in a perfect horrible storm in a way that is, one, a lesson for anyone who's telling the story in the modern day of the setting, and two, a sort of compelling reason for a horrific mistake to be made. Kendamarania writes, The Pacific Rim Catastrophes, an entry in San Chicoco 2065. The Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Peru, Chile, the Pacific Islands. Entire countries wiped in a decade is how the media tends to report on it. It's seen as the natural consequence of years of climate change put upon by the wealthiest countries, with poorer nations taking the brunt of its effects. In San Chicoco especially, you can see the refugees of this nuclear and climate tragedy encamped around San Mateo and its surrounding cities. The actual truth of the Pacific Rim catastrophes is something only the immigrants who migrated to America can understand, a tale of people who were caught in the crossfire of war. The aftershocks of Final Hour were immediately felt by the Pacific nations, especially in Asia. The nuclear blasts, even if they primarily targeted Japan and China, were so powerful that they could cause tsunamis and earthquakes as far as Hawaii. Firestorms raged while the oceans acidified, wiping the coral reefs. By 2030, although Final Hour officially ended, its effects would prove disastrous for the Pacific nations. Their economies, infrastructure, and environment were utterly ravaged by global climate change and nuclear war. In fact, islands and coastal cities were beginning to sink into the ocean due to rising sea levels. Breakaway American states, China, and Japan all had the money and technology available to fund massive seawalls, while poorer countries had to deal with floodings and even more intense typhoons than ever before. The people of these countries saw their homelands drowning and ruined, unable to recover from devastation, while the world gradually picked back up. With increasing instability in the governments due to corporate interference, people began to move away from their countries en masse, seeking refuge elsewhere. San Chicoco was one of the breakaway cities affected most by this global refugee crisis, as their immigration laws relaxed greatly due to a declining population by the 2050s. You could see the effects when driving down San Mateo and Foster City, where large encampments of Filipino, Vietnamese, Indonesian, Chilean, and Polynesian immigrants settled over the ruins of the Bay Area. It's questioned frequently whether these refugees have any hope to survive on the West Coast, as San Chicoco still faces the same corruption and ecological disaster that they faced in their homes far in the Pacific. Pretty solid breakdowns from Kendamarania on which groups had things well protected or solved thanks to technological and monetary advantage, and which groups simply had to take it until it was too much, and then they had to go to one of these locations, which is a great reason for all the centralization of populace and economy and corruption in sort of a few key places, San Chicoco obviously being our spotlight. Ed/Music Geekery writes, The Elven Sojourns and Magical Missions. There are two major migrations that have ultimately shaped the world of Deastara in very specific and dramatic ways. The first is the exodus of several tribes of wood elves into the lands of northern Seltros. The second is the journeys of assorted magic-wielding orders to the northern continent now known as Solarinia. Note before starting, I'll be using terms for periods of history specific to the setting. There are 3 ages, each split into different amounts. These are the Althron, Dawning Age, which naturally there is one of, Kothron, Becoming Age, which there are 5 of, and Elthron, Enlightened Age, which there have so far been 2 of. Dating format is as follows: age/year/month/day. These elves were naturally curious about Deastara, having arrived to the world in the early years of the first Kothron aboard their own spacefaring ships. After establishing their own islands of Tal Tel Selen, and eventually their capital city of Sevoro Trill in Q1 year 539, they began exploring. First were the efforts of the inquisitive Grey Elves, who traveled to the land of Kilratha, relative to the Second Exodus, in Q1 Y752. With a strong working relationship with the humans and Fae living there established, word spread to the other elven people to go out and explore.
In the year Q1 Y801, wanderlustful wood elves started slowly wending their way up through Seltros, some establishing small camps or otherwise settling down with their families. Others kept traveling all the way up to the far northern lands of Bulinar and Asilda. Those tribes found themselves enamored with the magnificent desolation and alien beauty of the Asildan deserts, rivers, mountains, gorges, and plains. They found a way to eke out a comfortable and nomadic lifestyle in the region, regularly trading with the humans and other races that lived there. Today, these nomadic elves call themselves the Kilfasur, the Sand Elves, and they are a proud, fierce, and honor-bound people. The other is a much more elaborate matter, as colonization was not the original intention. Solarinia, or as it was initially known, Caferos, Café being the Kilrathian word for coffee, Ros is the ancient Desteran word for land, was initially utilized as a staging ground for various magically inclined orders during the escalation wars with the Abrillian Empire. As implied, the land is rich in coffee plants, and it was discovered by the mages of the House Sovos that coffee greatly bolsters arcane energies. As such, many orders would flit back and forth between their homelands and the continent to experiment. Eventually, the escalation wars as well as the liberation wars started to come to a head, and it was determined that a permanent stationed force was necessary to protect from any Abrillian incursions. As such, several groups organized themselves to travel and establish themselves in Caferos. Among their number was the Order of Alik, a secretive order of mages who specialize in portal and summoning magic. The Megocrycal Kilrathian houses of Sovos, fire mages, Levos, wind mages, Rivos, water mages, and Nyavos, earth mages. The Fey houses of Acanthus, Olympera, Goodfellow, and Alaiapastra, and several military families. What started as merely a base of operations eventually became a home for these people, but the Order of Alik was not done with shoring up their power base and making the continent a place to truly challenge the Abrillian might. It was here that the ritual known as the Great Conjoining was performed. In the wake of the Great Conjoining, the land was reshaped, racked by the effects of various elemental energies seeping through, along with a whole chunk of the connection point between the elemental planes managing to fall through. Most of the information about this isn't really relevant to the current subject, but I'd be happy to elaborate on this further at a later date. What is important is that it was the efforts of the aforementioned mage houses that resulted in the renaming of the continent, their matriarchs and patriarchs uniting to contain the energies and form it into a huge crystalline structure known as the Gem of Asal. In the days after the Abrillian fell, Solarinia attracted many more families of spellcasters, all eager to attune themselves with the gem and develop their own elemental powers. Today, Solarinia is an incredibly diverse continent with all manner of elementalists, para-elementalists, and quasi-elementalists inhabiting it, all because of a few brave souls who were prepared to fight the good fight against an implacable evil. I'm hoping I got pronunciations correct here. There was a lot of in-world words, which I do love, but man, when you read those for the first time, it can be tricky. So if there are any things that I need correcting on, please have at it in the comments or in the Discord. I am also always happy to read a guide if anyone supplies one when they submit an entry. But I really must say, ed/music geekery, this thoroughness here is very fun to read. I mean, it reads very almost Tolkien-like in sort of the aligning of years and events, and I really enjoyed getting through this. Nugget writes, A Feeling of Dread, an entry in Time Traveler and the Immortal. Content warning, colonizers getting burned alive. It was the first time they had set foot on land for months. Months now at sea in the cramped and dark living quarters of the ship, it was nearly impossible to keep food and fresh water good for so long. There were rats, there was mold, there was sickness, plenty died on the way here, but at least they were here and there was much to do. Some men started their search for fresh water, taking some back for the rest of the colonizers and beginning to wash up after months being unable to do so properly. People began to cut down trees for their camp, crows flying up from the leaves in their disturbance. They wandered the area and mapped it out for later reference, and by the end of the day, the British flag had been raised on the soil. As the sun began to go down, the colonizers started a fire at their camp for light and warmth as they continued to set up sleeping quarters and cook some of what they had hunted. Murmurs about gold and fame and a hero's welcome back in Europe circulated as people were oblivious to the gathering crows. The mutterings stopped as an indigenous man approached them, accompanied by several more crows. He did not announce himself, simply stood there until the white men took notice. Once everyone there was looking at him in silence, the man finally spoke up. "Get off my lawn," he said simply, yet anger boiled underneath his words. The captain approached the indigenous man. "You misunderstand. My men and I come in peace." "Really?" He raised his eyebrows. "You are not the first Englishman or Spaniard coming here, and your friends have a funny definition of peace." Where did you learn English? You seem civil. We can have a proper conversation about this. We simply wish to utilize this land. It's already being used. People live here, people that aren't you. But not properly. You are not civilized, but we can help your kind live properly. You're bringing disease, is what you're doing, and digging up the land for gold that isn't even here. The ground around the indigenous man's feet began to smolder and smoke. I'm giving you this last chance to leave. We have been on the sea for months now. You can't expect us to... No. The fire in the middle of the camp went out, and the colonizers could feel their skin grow hot as their very blood began to boil. They began to scratch and itch at their bubbling flesh, dropping to the ground in agony as they yelled. The things they had brought, their tents, their ships, their weapons, caught fire, drowning the scene in bright scarlet fire. Ignis walked through the scene as the fire spread, his hair and pupilless eyes glowing like fire. He watched as the colonizers burned and writhed as the flesh fell from their bones and eventually were reduced to ash. He walked up to the British flag that they had planted to claim the land as theirs. It too quickly caught fire as he grabbed it and tore it down, cursing under his breath. Even now, as their camp burned, he looked out east at the ocean. There were yet more ships on the horizon. A feeling of dread built up in Ignis's throat. Just going to keep coming. They're 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 just going to keep coming. There was no stopping this. Man, this is one of the more unique voices and perspectives that we've had in really any of Nugget's work, actually. And Ignis is one of the deities of the Time Travel and the Immortal series, correct, Nugget? Its name sounds familiar, and it also kind of sounds like a kind of deity name that Nugget would come up with. So hopefully my intuition is correct. I Am Crab174 writes, Walk of Ashes / The Great Nocturni Migration. When it comes to the migrations in my world, there is really only one that people living there would bring up. Sure, there were smaller-scale migrations of humans as they started to evolve in the world, but none can compare to the Walk of Ashes. The Nocturni have their own name for it, but that's the closest translation people have been able to identify. The cause? Greed, of course. The great volcano the Bat people called home for many centuries was a fundamental part of their culture. They played to the elder dragon which slept at the bottom of its fiery pits, and they prayed to their godly mothers, their creators, flora and fauna. The Nocturni had built a great civilization within the volcano, becoming one of the most prosperous races. And then the dwarves came, creatures of the Creator, a different god. The Nocturni first opened up their arms to them, offering to help the new race grow and prosper, even offering them residence within the volcano. At first, the dwarves were equally kind, utilizing their naturally resistant skin to help the Nocturni build more structures in the lava. But that all changed after they found the etchings. A group of dwarves had started exploring deeper into the volcano, ending up in a large, ritual-like room filled with cave paintings and etchings. This was where the Bat people held their ceremonies and religious activities. They often communed with celestials, future-seeing beings in a floating kingdom, to learn what was to come and then record it on the walls. The dwarves discovered a series of paintings portraying a smaller race driving the Nocturni out and raising some great being from the fire. Instantly, they took it to mean they deserved the volcano for themselves and launched a surprise attack, exploiting their host's good nature and using what the Nocturni had taught them themselves. The Nocturni were caught off guard and didn't have much of a strong military anyways, and were eventually forced to flee or risk being genocided. Their whole race was fractured, many separated from their families, but the dwarves weren't done. They wanted them gone. They chased them out even farther, using fire and lava to thin them out with burns. Many ended up losing their ability to fly from how severe injuries were. It took weeks for the Bats to even slightly regroup. Their leader had survived but was badly wounded, his lungs damaged by a fire which was lit in his home, killing his mate and son in the process. With no home to return to, he declared that they would search for a new one, and thus started the Walk of Ashes. The Nocturni traveled for almost a year and a half, their numbers so small that it would have been laughable to call them a dominant race anymore. Along the way, they developed a new survival mechanism, bloodlust. When a Nocturni gets to the point of starvation, their bodies and physiology change. They become ravenous, able to gain more nutrients from any part of a living creature, but especially blood. However, it came at the cost of them losing their minds mostly, as well as becoming cannibalistic. Eventually, they would find a place to call home, a huge cave system in the mountains, far away from everyone else, but they had lost so much along the way that they weren't sure they would ever recover. They stopped praying to fire, as the flames had taken everything from them, but they prayed to flora and fauna still for helping them find a new place to live. The other races were horrified at what the dwarves had done at first, but as time passed, the Nocturni people became something more like a fairy tale, big scary monsters to scare children with. They were and still are real though, just hundreds of miles away from their true home and their true selves. Definitely end up with a lot of tragedy with a prompt like this, but it makes sense. I mean, so many of the major migrations we know from our own more recent histories are really due to oppression and tragedies as well. And they are a compelling way to work out diversity in areas of a world, or just compelling way to give a species or a group of peoples a more dynamic or interesting history. For day 474, the prompt was, what is an artifact in your world that defies understanding or its use has been lost to time? Add on Caffiene or Feisty 0007 writes, the weapons of balance, of mercy and bloodshed, and the armor stained in blood and betrayal. Feisty also notes at the top, so this is based on the origins of the main aggressor faction that is in the fanfic I'm writing. Do search up what a Tontine is beforehand. This is written in a fairy tale retelling way, so it is an obvious bias skew. For the Tontine I'm talking about in current age, there's 4 rulers/families, all referred to by different colors. There isn't direct mention of gore, but like talks of what they do, but I put the tag just in case. For the listeners, I will also read out the beginning of the Wikipedia entry for Tontine. A Tontine is an investment linked to a living person which provides an income for as long as that person is alive. Such schemes originated as plans for governments to raise capital in the 17th century and became relatively widespread in the 18th and 19th centuries. Tontines enable subscribers to share the risk of living a long life by combining features of a group annuity with a kind of mortality lottery. Each subscriber pays a sum into a trust and thereafter receives a periodical payout. As members die, their payout entitlements devolve to the other participants, and so the value of each continuing payout increases. On the death of the final member, the trust scheme is usually wound up. The proper entry begins now.
Dear child, what are you on about? Said the old woman to her grandson. My friends told me about these amazing weapons, Falsanthos and Dinos. My friends told me a dark knight wielded them and saved people, and apparently the knight is living somewhere in the Feylands, the little boy exclaimed while playing with G.I. Joe figures. The old woman had gained a distant look before gently explaining to the child. Dear, you are right. The knight did wield those weapons, but they aren't living in the Feylands. In fact, the knight hasn't needed to pick up their weapons for quite some time. Really? Did they retire or something? The boy asked. No, young one. Let me tell you about the story of the Eldritch and the weapons of mercy and bloodshed and the knight's armor, the old woman replied. The Eldritch of Balance was once thought to be lost in a realm long forgotten in this day and age. In reality, she only appears when a major conflict arises. As of late, there hasn't been one to draw her attention in the realm Earth resides in, or in most realms she held responsibility to. She didn't rule them, more was an advisor to the current rulers or governments. She wasn't omnipotent, but she had ways of understanding what the conflict was truly about, be it either clairvoyance on soldiers or what stories that land would hold that she could hear. Long before that, she had to manage several realms and hold gods and other eldritches like in check, hence why she is of balance and harmony. For she knows there can't be true peace. Like a forest, there has to be a wildfire to grow newer, healthier plants. She fought alongside the dragons in the 250 years war between the dragons and Fae, and most Fae antagonized wars until she finally pushed their kingdoms into treaties and fought for the humans when different pantheons tried using them to their advantage. As the story goes, there were legends about a knight shrouded in dark armor, supposedly made of an elder god's heart, appearing through mists onto the field mainly to contain the battle so it didn't spread into neighboring lands that had innocent people living there. It was thought the knight was in service of the Eldritch as it wielded the weapons of her crafting. If it was a battle of oppression, the knight would distract the aggressors so the defiant could leave and regroup. If it was to defend from marauders seeking ancient knowledge, the knight would use a polearm, Falsanthos, or in common mercy, or guard the weapon, and strike the walls, converting them to an indestructible crystal that only the knight could move as a way to fortify the defenses. They would then commit acts of espionage among the ranks by glamoring themselves and stealing invaluable intel. One such battle was during the Crusades in a kingdom whose name was lost to time and ran by Fae who were tired of the current state of their realm. The knight did as they have before, fortified the walls and stood waiting on the ledge for the siege coming. The knight held their trusted bow, Dinos, or bloodshed/pierce the heart. What people didn't know was that Falsanthos and Dinos were interchangeable, much like how the weapons were. The polearm could morph into the bow, and the bow could morph into the polearm.
Like a sword, this weapon was an extension of the night. The same iridescent lilac crystals that came forth when Falsanthos struck the earth made up the blades, and a darkened metal with veins of moonlight yellow throughout made up the handle. If you were close enough, you could see 2 tassels on either side of the near each blade, made of a blue aura holding silver touched wood that glowed in the moonlight. When Dinos' arrow pierces through armor, the same crystal and metal would be seen. It would then vanish in blue smoke, knocked in the blue wisp-turned string, ready for the next strike by Dinos. Dinos was the silver-touched wood, and the aura made up its string and fletching of the arrows. The darkened metal made up the braces to knock back an arrow and hold the string as well as the body of the arrow. The lilac crystal made up the arrowhead and hold support. The knight intimately knew how to fight with each respectively, using it as a way to channel their other abilities through the strikes or shots. As time went on, there was no need for her or the knight to step in as she set in place counsels and directives to try and keep relative peace. Even she knew there would still be conflict. It should minimize the backlash. She would only step in if there was no other way to stop a danger. Now you may be wondering, where is this wondrous weapon now? It's still with the Eldritch, now glamoured into a staff used to guide lost souls and gain order in council. She had given her armor to an old human friend for safekeeping, so as to let the humans have a way to protect themselves from danger, an act she'll later regret as humans fought for generations about that armor, for power it could supposedly give instead of its protection. A move she won't repeat after seeing the direct consequence of seeing her friend be betrayed and having to hide the armor and his bloodline so as not to be hunted by the Tontine he had unknowingly agreed to. She'll still help the humans, but in indirect ways to avoid this conflict again. Most of the world forgets about the weapon in favor of the armor. People only remember the wielder rather than the blade. As the legend had it, she cursed the armor after she learned of the betrayal and crafted a sword to accompany it, locked until a worthy descendant of her friend would rally his kin and end the war. So is this why we continue the taunting and hunt the betrayers? Why don't we try going after the weapon instead? The boy asked. Yes, dear, that is why we fight the betrayers. The reason why is we have no knowledge of where the Eldritch and the weapon have been, thought to be smelted by that Fey kingdom as repayment for the harm caused that the knight couldn't stop. Regardless, no mortal could wield the weapon, only the armor, so it's effectively useless to the Tontine. She replied. She imagined seeing her grandson take over as Mr. Indigo when he's old enough, his father teaching him what he needed and passing the title on so as the other 3 rulers won't suspect, all united in the fight against the betrayers, the blade breakers. After all, the Tontine won't forget. Interesting. I definitely found it a little bit tough to follow because we basically didn't have any names, and so we were getting a bunch of different pronouns thrown around that were kind of confusing me. But I think I got the gist of it. And I like this this Tontine concept is interesting as a sort of pushing forward of conflict. It makes a lot of sense. And it's a cool, I'm glad you put that note at the top so we could get a little bit more of an idea of why a group would be encouraged to hunt other Tontine members down. Kendamarania writes, Scream Sheet, pre-our artifact, an entry in Sanchikoku 2065. Now, I told Kendamarania I would put a disclaimer before this. A voice acting disclaimer, I guess I should say. Because this is supposed to be done in and there's no other way to say this, an uwu voice. So I'm going to do my best. To you, the listener, I say prepare for some likely incoming cringe. And let's get into it. Excerpt of a scream sheet by Puku Puku Newsies, a Japanese/breakaway U.S. news agency in Sanchikoku. Yatta! Good morning, Chrome Cuties. Hopefully you aren't bleeding glitter pink and Hayward or getting your cyberware ripped apart in millipetas. That would be terrible. Today we are presenting a special artifact that we donate to us by our lovely friends over in the SSPD. Many kisses and hugs to our police neighbors who keep us safe from the gangaloons in the streets. This one was recovered from a corporate combat zone in the South Bay from the depths of some bombed-out building. We can't tell for certain what it is, but we know for a fact that it existed before the nuclear bombs, meaning it's pre-hour. That's right. We're talking about prehistoric tech right here. I know techies and net cruisers reading are blowing their socks right now. Unfortunately, the police don't identify what exactly this was. So sad. However, our database shows that this artifact is something called a landline, whatever heck that's supposed to mean. Oh, whoa. However, it's so old that it still needs a wire to operate. Not only that, but this artifact had to be pulled straight out of the wall. Oh, wow. How weird is that? The cord is only about an arm in length, so you practically go nowhere. As for the actual functionality, we unfortunately haven't got a clue. But there is a second part of the device that looks suspiciously like the icon for calling we have on our holos. We can't get it to work though, mostly because it has to be connected straight to the wall, and we haven't figured out its odd wheel number thing. So in effect, this is junk, but there's still some valuable tech that can be recovered. Sugoi! If you want to grab a hold of this strange object, there is an auction for it going on in Lang Executive Plaza right now. However, it's fetching a high price already at thousands of digis. Better get it fast. I really feel like I didn't do a good job, which is why I gave you a warning. Otherwise, I mean, great stuff for a cyberpunk neon setting. I'm hoping this isn't a thing that I'm going to have to work on, but you know what? I will do my best. You give me a voice acting concept, I'll do my best. And you know what? Hopefully next time it's even better. I say hopefully. Hopefully, if I have to do this again, it'll be better. Let's roll with that. For day 475, the prompt was, what is a keystone species in your world's ecosystem? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Probin the Great writes, weeping sprites an entry in what lies west. Probin notes at the top, a little whimsy never hurt anyone. Well, unless it's a sallow whimsy. The proper entry begins now. The sprites? I don't know what they even is, man. They're biggish, like the size of a balled fist, maybe. Blue and glowy, and they also make musical notes when they bump into each other. Listen, you should probably get Amelia in here. She pays way more attention to this kind of thing. Gert's Ribmangler, Adventurer. Monster call signs. Visual presence. Musical chimes. Rotting plant life in area. Weeping sprites are elemental monsters of the West, being found within the Sorrowed Weald, though theoretically they could appear anywhere a powerful hydromancy source is located. Weeping sprites are half-foot across glowing blue motes of water, humming just audibly above the constant leaf fall of the weald. While at first their behavior seems unguided, with them bumbling into trees and bushes aimlessly, on closer inspection, an inspection done by my colleague Ashcrum, who speaks strange, weeping sprites seem to be the crux of the weald's ecosystem. Weeping sprites are rampant decomposers. They wander throughout the weald, searching for decaying plant and monster matter before latching onto the source of rot and dissolving it within their bodies. Weeping sprites, being water elementals, do not exactly possess a need for rotting matter. There are theories that the old Empire of the West specifically designed the sprites for the Sorrowed Weald, knowing well in advance the amount of rot that would be created by such a massive and dense biosphere. Regardless, weeping sprites do in fact dissolve rotting matter, and whether we understand why or not, they and they alone keep the weald clean and healthy. This consumption and refinement of decaying matter means that, despite their actual bodies being completely comprised of magic, the contents within a sprite are edible, at least to desperate monsters. Some plants also exude a rotting smell to attract sprites, such as the surgeon, a towering electric plant with spines covering its exterior that can pop a sprite and cause it to deposit its contents before reforming. Weeping sprites are of no harm to adventurers, with their small bodies and harmless exteriors being of no threat to even the smallest kobold. If one cannot find suitable water for drinking, weeping sprites can be popped to drop their contents, then, once they reform, can be drunk straight out of the air without consequence. Weeping sprites are only actively eaten by maws, which are invasive within the weald. There are concerns that the maws may inadvertently collapse the entire ecosystem of the weald and perhaps other regions if they are not controlled in population. Sprites do not prey on any creature, as is their nature as elementals. Man, there's a great sense of mystery that pervades a lot of the What Lies West entries, which, honestly, if there wasn't, maybe that means Predwin wouldn't be doing as good of a job, but he clearly is doing a great job because there's so much hints at greater history that Predwin doesn't even necessarily need to write or know, yet they are very compelling. Like, maybe the reason that these elementals are doing something they're not really typically seen doing is because of something older than the current situation in the West. Bulbman 5000 writes The Giants of Seroth. There are many giant species of creatures on Seroth, but few are as truly spectacular as the group of species nicknamed the Guardian Giants. All of them radiate an element of magic that alters the environment around them. All of them are walking threats to the Scourge corruption, and all of them were revered by the spiritualists for millennia. The first among them is the herbivorous Carvidae, known as the Keton, a colossus of forest magic. The magic the Keton radiate acts as a fertilizer for all plant life around it, growing singular flowers into large bushes, growing trees into wooden towers that loom over the land, and yet it always seems to stop at just the right height. The Keton bear a brown skin beneath the foliage, replacing conventional fur across them. All the while, their antlers are akin to winding tree branches. Many often get frightened by the 3-story tall Keton, but those who know how it behaves knows that you are safe near it, for despite its size and its seemingly never looking down, it always seems to know where the smaller life forms below it are, making the Keton surprisingly safe despite their size. But when they are threatened, their magic has another function, to wield the forest itself as a weapon, stretching tendrils from tree bark and turning flowers into barbs. The Keton are very adept at defending themselves with their environment. Another more well-known beast is the Vanas, the giants of the sea. The Vanas are gargantuan whales with a striking turquoise coloration. They, like the Keton, are both influencers of their environment and gentle giants unless provoked. The presence of even a single Vanas is holy for many cultures, as the magic they radiate cleanses the waters around them of pollutants, leaving the water pristine in due time. When provoked, the Vanas demonstrate that them having baleen plates instead of conventional teeth to be a threat to attackers. The Vanas can manipulate the water around them to refract light and seemingly disappear like a ghost, all the while pressurizing with water to turn the ocean itself into an aquatic spear. Many attribute an old tale to the Vanas, a tale of when a greedy merchant was taken by a tendril of water and dragged into the ocean to drown. These feel like big old friendly fellows I would find in a cozy video game. I like the vibes here. Very, very, wholesome feeling. It's nice. Now, for day 476, I did actually have a repeat prompt, and it did not wind up getting any entries, but that prompt was, in case anyone is interested, what does non-perishable food look like in your world from ScrubsyBoy844? I had somehow not checked it off when I used it about 100 days ago, but there you have it. We all make mistakes. We'll move on to the next day. For day 477, the prompt was, what is considered to be an architectural wonder in your world? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Bulbman5000 writes, the Rand's Stronghold. The palace of the Rand's capital isn't exactly anything remarkable. On its own, it's a 6-floor palace made of stone bricks with a small outer wall and 4 towers at the 4 corners of said wall. Even despite its well-chiseled stone statues and immaculate architecture, the palace itself isn't anything impressive. It's what is underneath it that's far more impressive. Beneath the palace, stretching for miles, depths so low that many can't see the bottom, width so vast it looks as monolithic as the deep to those who first see it, is the underground citadel. The citadel is a truly wondrous sight of architecture, facilities as far as the eyes can see, factories galore, and even farms for choice crops. It also connects the Onik Necra factory housing the core furnace, the very construct even the Patriarch sought to control. However, now the citadel is mostly barren. With the Rand's curse and then the Scourge's corruption seeping into it, the citadel has become a nightmare realm. Human skin, limbs, and bones stretch across it like mold, eyes that frantically look at anything that moves, mouths wriggling and gasping for air to fill lungs they do not have. The citadel has become one of the most dangerous places in that old kingdom. Nice, we got some more kind of gross Resident Evil-esque style stuff. The Scourge, I really like the vibe. I'm getting a better idea of what the Scourge is, which is very kind of like Resident Evil crossed with a teratoma tumor kind of situation, which honestly do not look that up if you are not good with squeamish things. From the Great Rights, the Voltaic Monolith. He notes at the top, shocking stuff really, and then a bunch of laughing. The proper entry begins now. Boring, if I'm to be honest. Nothing to fight, nothing to eat, nothing to do, really, at least on the surface. There's some trees and stuff there, though, so that's neat, I guess. Gertrude Mangler, Adventurer. The Voltaic Monolith is the name given to the region of the west surrounding the artifact of the same name. This pillar of stone, a site of power, sits at an estimated mile to mile and a half tall, roughly 7,000 feet tall at the most. This is the largest standing structure within the west, though still obviously shorter than the wall of diamonds known as the Wormscale reaches. The Voltaic Monolith earns its name from its constant attraction of lightning from storm clouds that perpetually sit above its tip. This energy is sent via large metal cables to the Forlorn Graveyard, being the only path in the west that can be reliably followed between two regions. The Voltaic Monolith's surrounding area is constantly plagued by random lightning strikes as excess energy makes its way from the central pillar to supplementary lightning rods that soak up what would have been wasted energy. Despite this, some bolts still miss the auxiliary poles and strike the dirt floor of the area, creating large pillars of molten glass as the mass of Earth flings up and cools rapidly. These chunks of glass are well-tempered, being more than capable of shattering a solid steel blade if enough force is applied. With their sheer presence across the region and the rarity of these missed strikes being roughly once per week, according to reports, it would seem that the Voltaic Monolith might in fact be the oldest standing structure within the West, possibly even older than the only other contender, the Forlorn Graveyard. With the constant overcast skies, the tyrannical sun's wrath cannot pierce the clouds often. This has allowed limited flora to occur and evolve under the rule of the monolith. These plants all are completely reliant on the electromancy produced by the region, as they are without sun to generate standard energy. The plant life here is largely without leaves, instead relying on the vermis pattern to attract the electromancy in the area. For those unfamiliar with magic patterns, they are naturally occurring formations of rock that occur near certain sites of power. These patterns increase the attraction of their particular elemental force. The Vermeus pattern, named by its discoverer Rannick Vermeus, is a series of overlapping square shapes rotating 45 degrees in smaller and smaller series of rows. The plants in the area attempt to gain a large surface area with numerous crevices and giant flat wings like that of a mammoth's ear. While these plants could theoretically sustain themselves forever in a perfect environment, the fluctuation of the potency of magic during full and new moons means that some plants may grow too large and starve after repetitively smaller moon phases. These floral deaths revitalize the soil and allow what little water content remains to be sustained despite the harsh environment, allowing more plants to sprout even in such hostile earth. If not for the voltaic monolith's presence, this patch of desert would still be nothing more than sand and dead cacti. The only monsters, if you can call them that are found within this region are small insects that feed off the plant life in the area, or from the other herbivorous insects. Nothing here is larger than a closed fist, and nothing here poses a threat to adventurers in the slightest, save for a rash if bitten. The plant life here is still great for alchemical reagents, meaning that it's never truly a wasted trip. I like this plant life is really unique. You've done a good job making this ecology in this strange area sound pretty believable from a world-building standpoint. The Wanderer writes, The Starkling Empire Capital and Entry in Forest Kingdom. Grand Engineers Log Date 11-100-406. They want me to build what? They have any idea how hard it's going to be to build a shell around Justice. I know it's the capital, but really, can't we just be satisfied with just an orbiting station? Okay, thank you, Sheila. How am I even going to convince of making this work? Okay, let me think. At least let me get the forum request the Grand Architect sent me to try and make. The proposed design is to build a ring across the entire gas giant. Justice has 6 billion square miles, and we could, given the funding, and somehow if we ever feasibly pull this off, make use of about a tenth of it. Justice's composition is, however, 77% nitrogen, 22% oxygen, and 1% other compositions. As such, a ring structure would be breathable, though some adaptation might be needed. This is, of course, overlooking a very crucial portion of this. How are we going to get a ring across an entire gas giant, let alone a shell structure's exponential cost, the energy cost, the fiscal bill, how to handle the lack of building spaces? But never mind all that. I need to think of how I will build this. Well, you said my budget was what? Okay, maybe this is a worthwhile project. Thanks, Sheila. Grand Engineers Log, date 22-79-425. Well, the plans are completed. The first ring segment is finished and is awaiting its 420,000 siblings. That will complete the very first ring. I decided in the end to use the rings like boats supported by the density of the atmosphere. If they want to build heftier structure, I recommend building a counterweighted structure to balance out the weight to prevent undue stress. It's still baffling how much funds they'd given me for this project. It's got to be at least a tenth of our GDP. Really fun megastructure level of stuff here, building a ring around a gas giant, like a livable space, I'm assuming, is what it seems like from the image that we got, which is a pretty cool image, by the way. I'm assuming it's like the cities within the rings that are built around this thing or something. Maybe I'm interpreting this incorrectly, but love the vibes. /Music Geekery writes, Histornellum quo Dionysus. And hopefully I said that right. 7 millennia ago, a sorceling by the name of Dionysus had a dream sent unto him by the goddess of fate, Torvis Rend. That dream was to construct and chronicle Daestara in a form that would last for eternity. He was sent to the volcanoes of Bufogo Suksok to retrieve the hardest of obsidian. From there to the depths of the Myelsan Sea, where he would find in a deep ocean trench a pearlescent sand that he swore took shape into the words he spoke. Lastly, to the frozen wastes of Kemvela in Sivalkla, the source for a rare and potent flower whose pollen was said could grant the one who imbibed the potion of it with the powers of clairvoyance. With these resources, Dionysus began to craft the Histornellum. The effort took him almost 30 years, but eventually the obelisk stood tall and proud. For as long as his life allowed, he continuously and painstakingly updated the obelisk to the best of his efforts, tapping into every kind of divination spell possible. But eventually old age came for him, as it does all of us. And yet, the obelisk continued to update, and even all these millennia since it continues to do so.
It is said to chronicle every single event of significance to happen in Daystara, every extinction, every innovation, every kingdom that falls, and every new founding, all of the purview of the obelisk. This and a continuous increase in height are the only notable alterations the Histornalum has undergone. Occasionally, someone will get it in their head that they can attempt to interfere with the obelisk, trying to modify it and create false information, and on those occasions, the individual has met the same terrifying fate, that of becoming one with the base of the monument. Over the centuries, it has become littered with the transfixed faces of horror of its victims. Across each of these people's faces and bodies is carved their name, their dates of birth and death, and even the event in question that they tried to modify, along with their falsehood, as though to act as a warning to any who might try the same. Since its construction, it has weathered and endured and extended skywards, littered with the long, complicated, storied history of Daystara. It's really interesting to put a source of truth into a world you're working on that its inhabitants can interact with in some way, because you deal with all these kind of interesting consequences of that can be really fun, because some of the ease sometimes of world building is that the people in your world don't necessarily know all the metaphysics or all of the truth of things that have happened. And so sometimes you can say, well, this person did this thing that seems dumb because they just didn't know. But do people have as much of an excuse if you have something like the Histornalum? It's kind of a fun little thing to drop in there and experiment with. For day 478, the prompt was, are there any historical reenactments in your world? Rowan the Great writes, plays for their majesty, an entry in what lies west. He notes at the top, Wallad, you prankster you, that was a children's hospital. Laughter. Now. The proper entry begins now. Sometimes a cruel man dies. A dictator is brought low, or a madman is caught by the law. For some of these events, they are simply forgotten. For others, remembered with disdain. But for a choice few, those events of historical importance or just a good roll of the dice, a different kind of memory may be formed by the peasantry and playwrights. From the death of the cruel Iridine Thaddeus to the fall of grace that befell Rhaegor Vernerin, the most devoted followers of Wallad desire to turn tragedy and fear into laughs and smiles. There are many such plays and interpretations of them all throughout both Koros and Balfora, with puppet shows in the City of Worms and in-depth multi-dozens of gold-worth acts in Luminarch. All of this is largely conducted by the willing or even unwitting followers of Wallad the Whimsical, efforts that most often in vain attempt to earn the chuckling god's favor. But what does this favor look like? Well, most often it is represented as even better ideas for comedies and dramas, though I admit I don't see the attraction in working for the right to work harder next time around. At least that's what it seems to be. Then there's a break, implying some time has passed. I just witnessed a flower vase get knocked over, which rolled over to my table, breaking a leg of the chair, that then fell backwards into my own chair, breaking the backrest and thus causing me to fall and bump my head. My apologies, Wallad, for ever doubting. Talked about this a little bit on the short form, but I really do love that we get kind of direct intervention, at least from the lens of the narrator, appears to believe that this was direct intervention, and I really do like that. It's fun. Kendamarania writes, Marbleization, an entry in Return to Faelund. Marbleization is a magical process that occurs naturally or willingly by a magician, named as such due to its extreme petrification curse that turns anyone affected by it into white marble. Its use traces back to the Zoatic era, where it was first refined by the Zoa of Will as a last-ditch spell against the monsters he slayed. These statues never chip or lose their luster from age, remaining perfectly preserved for eternity. The scars of his battles against Oblivion's creations can still be found throughout Faelund's depths, magnificent dragons, mountain giants, and absurd beasts locked in an eternal struggle while covered in alabaster. Like all curses in Faelund, marbleization is permanent and irreversible, practically making any creatures turned into sculpture dead. Marbleization also occurs naturally by wild magic's influence. This has occurred more recently throughout the long fog, such as its petrifying entire villages and armies into white stone, sometimes even in the middle of battles. This occurs often in the Chrome Mountains and the Elfin Vale, where the statues can sink and rise into the ground, recreating events long in the past for magic's own amusement.
The Crystalline Order also sometimes uses marbleization spells when under extreme distress, taking a page of Will's own strategy in the days yonder. Like the Zoatic Knight himself, they use it frequently as a last resort against overwhelming forces of armies during the long fog, petrifying everyone in a wide radius, including the caster themselves. These statues serve as one reminder of the long fog scars over Faelund, years after it quieted it down, where they may be locked in battle forever and for eternity. I like that we don't really know whether or not someone who has undergone marbleization is actually still sentient, still conscious of the world around them. Hopefully not. Kendamarania did seem to imply that they were dead, at least, which, is what you would hope for if that kind of thing happened to you. For day 479, the prompt was, what are some tangible pieces of evidence of class divide in your world? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Bulbman5000 writes, the Empire's Abyss. The Cathar Empire is one of exploitation, cruelty, and consumption. Though its technology is great, there is a decay within its walls, and so came the cybernetics, acting as New Age prosthetics for their people, and so came the taxmen, the embodiment of the disparity between the people and the ruling class. When a Cathar citizen is given cybernetics, either to augment their capabilities or as a prosthetic as they were originally intended, they are immediately thrust into debt for imperial credits. If they succeed in paying the debt, they can live in relative peace, however few are able to. But for the many who can't, they share the fate of the many who couldn't. The taxmen, towering Cathar clones augmented by so much machinery they can sometimes be mistaken for machines, come and hunt down the indebted target. If they catch the imperial citizen in question, they are brought to the science division of the Empire where the procedure begins. The Cathar the taxmen took is then physically dismantled, the cybernetics stripped from their bodies no matter how horrific the act, and then left in the pit. In that moment, the Empire doesn't care about if the person is alive or dead, only that they have been left to die, and the Empire now has the very machinery the poor soul went into debt for. This is why the other civilizations view the Cathar Empire as one of the most vile civilizations on Seroth. Predatory debt practices are maybe one of the most consistent things throughout sort of the history of finance, and they are a great way to enforce sort of class divide. Nugget writes, as above, so below, an entry in Petrichor. Petrichor is split into 3 estates: the clergy, the aristocracy, and everybody else. It takes direct reference from the political setup in 1790s France, where the National Convention gathered for the first time in over a century under King Louis XVI. The way it was set up was that each estate had 1 vote, regardless of population, which, as a friendly reminder, the third estate made up 98% of the population. What would generally happen is there would be a proposition to raise taxes on the third estate to help with France's debt problem, and the 2% of the clergy and aristocracy would vote for it, the 98% would vote against, but it still went in favor of the first 2 estates. Petrichor doesn't even get that much of a luxury. The third estate has quite literally 0 say in their politics. Everything in their lives is directly in the hands and mercy of the clergy and the aristocracy, and there is nothing they can do except revolt, I suppose, but that's later. Petrichor is built very vertically. The richer you are, the higher up you live, and the church is the tallest point in the entire city. It is a very visible divide in the class structure. The rich rise above and ignore the struggles of the poor, and the poor look up in spite as they wade through waist-high water. The poor cannot afford food, while the rich indulge in luxury. Perhaps the best example I can give is the hurricane that hit Petrichor and Edward and Thaddeus' backstory. The rich hardly cared. They stayed inside and distracted themselves from the wind. Petrichor is made of stone, after all. The storms surge, however. The drainage systems are neglected in Lower Petrichor. It was an evacuation zone, yet no action was taken to help people to higher ground. The levees broke in Lower Petrichor, completely submerging it in 25 feet of water, trapping those who could not get out due to circumstance or had nowhere else to go. The lower parts of the city were destroyed, and the rich never so much as noticed. I think a lot of Petrichor's realism does lie in this fact. The era that it's pulled from and the way in which it behaves does feel pretty accurate. For day 480, the prompt was, if one exists, what is the divine hierarchy like? And this comes from NYUX in the Discord. Proman the Great writes, his word is law, an entry in what lies west. There is a quote before the entry image, which is attributed to Seamster Ivan. The connoisseur is confused by many words and lapping tides, a 2-sided sword in each syllable, a laughing, grimacing face behind each breath. What would become of sinners speaking with words of saints within the canvas? The artist asks his lookers what they will do. And for his followers, they would face his foe without fear and with conviction. There is only the greatest of paradises waiting for them in death. Become unto yourself what he would make you. Do what he would ask. Think what he would allow. Only then, when you accept his will unto yourself, will you become pure. Excerpt from the Book of Orpheus, Sanctum, verse 444. The Lightbringer is salvation in darkness. He is the lantern at the bow of a ship, the beacon on top of a tower, the port in a storm. When others ask if there is a king or queen of gods, they wonder only of Orpheus, for there is no other answer. What other god would heal the sick? Who else would shield a peasant from mutation? Who else has the power to defy even death for any with faith in he who lights the world? None. For there is none else as benevolent as he, none else as giving, cheerful, and merciful as he, none else who would look upon their followers and think of them not as a resource, but as precious things. For he, and only he, was once a man. From the world god Harush to the primordial horror of Ragnaros, none else have lived as we have, none else have died as we will. Orpheus, and Orpheus alone, knows how well we have lived and died and suffered. He alone can console us in our darkest hour. So then, faithful chaff, you are a diamond in the rough for your faith alone, a prize any other deity would be jealous and covetous of. How many other gods have had defectors flock to them instead of Orpheus, rather than the other way around? You may hear whispers from drunk men suggesting that even Orpheus's faithful can waver. They are lying scoundrels whose lives are over for their lack of belief. So do not falter, not even for a moment, for a second may undo centuries of devotion, and a minute may forever damn oneself to the deep. I like this responses prompt a lot because I think some of the most compelling ways you can respond to this prompt is within world writing as opposed to the typical world builder exposition. Not to say that that isn't fun and very valid, but I really like the depiction of, well, this group obviously sees this as the highest pinnacle of divine power. Whether that's true at all, it doesn't matter. This group believes that and writes literature on it, which they would if they believed that, right? So great stuff from Prelwin, as always. And/music Geekery writes, a hierarchy of needs and inevitabilities. The hierarchy of the gods of Daystara is, for the most part, a fairly straightforward one. At the top are the goddess Delmora, who presides over life and creation, her husband Nicarus, who governs the realm of death as well as for some reason cats and curries, and the god Anjanksa-Taulanen, the god of time. These three make up the tripartite governing body of the gods. Most gods defer to one of these three, either because they are their offspring, grandchildren, or because they have a sense of obligation to them. It is rare for the gods to defy these three, and when that has happened, it has been in the direst of times. DM note, due to the events of my current campaign, several of the gods aligned to challenge Delmora's will because they believed it necessary to intervene with the world more actively than they typically do. To them, simply channeling their power through their clerics is no longer enough. Below the first three are the court of primacy. These are the firstborn of the triad who govern the forces that act upon the universe as a whole. They are comprised of the god of chaos, Kaukodik, and his sister, the goddess of law, Torvis Rend, the god of light, Beelobog, and his brother, the god of darkness, Zenarbog. Note, not good and evil, more like yin and yang type energies. And the three-faced god, Amapuvaila, Yola, working name, the god of morning, noon, and night. Then there is the Pantheon, the second-born and younger who preside over the elements, the activities of mortals themselves, their life events, and so on. This includes the likes of the quadruplets, Ignisis, the god of fire and raw emotions, Aquiara, goddess of water and the flow of magic, Geliosis, pronounced with a hard G, god of the earth and personal judgment, and Vicentis, god of the wind and flights of fancy. The sextuplets of body, mind, and spirit, Gilistrin and Gilinyal of the former, Telestrin and Telenyal of the middle, and Vilistrin and Vilinyal of the latter. It includes the goddess Amhrai, the goddess of creativity, inspiration, and compassion, her husband Eximinus, the god of peace, and their son Nasdieth, the god of hope. Hafeneth and Hisieth, the twin brothers of curatives and poisons respectively, are also among their number. There are many others beside, including the many para and quasi-elemental gods born to either unions or crafting objects, as they can best be termed. A fun example is Kivinyen, the god of gemstones and minerals, as well as Greed, who is often seen riding on the back of his father, Geliosis. Geliosis looks like a mountain-sized anteater, and Kivinyen, a giant armadillo, along with a god of the weather and seasons known as Sanhoitia, who was created through a pooling of multiple gods' efforts and thus effectively defers to them equally. There are some notable outliers amongst the gods whose reasons for following or not following the hierarchy are personal to them. Eximinus, who has no relation to any of the triad, more often than not will simply abide by what one of the triad dictates because of his peaceful nature, unless one of them proposes encouraging war. The enigmatic and ponderous wandering god, who simply acts by his own personal whims and has little concern for the activities of the pantheon. Chalcodic, who by his very nature is incapable of obeying laws and edicts, though he tends to stay within reasonable lines out of a curious fear of Angenxa Tolinen. Kuniosusi, the faithful hound god of respect and understanding, who conversely is by his very nature incapable of disobeying one of their orders, and the destructive volcanic god Nestemituli, who is imprisoned and so wrathful that he would not recognize anyone's authority. Though not a fully rigid structure, there is generally a high level of respect shown to the elders within the hierarchy unless your name happens to be Chalcodic or Nestemituli. Hopefully I got even close on some of those pronunciations. In the future, you may want to give me a pronunciation dump at the bottom. Stuff like that is pretty useful for me and, helpful for you to make sure that your stuff comes across as you envision it. Really great, thorough, sort of just listing out a bunch of the pantheon here. You've got a lot of gods built out. Kind of cool stuff. It'd be neat if in the future we get to see a little bit of like the actual depth on some of these, but really neat. NYUX writes, the divine ranking. All the gods are ranked by type categories, with their categories mainly being in order of the amount of divine energy within them. The order is creation gods, elder gods, elemental goddesses, prime gods, faction gods, guardians, spirits, omega beings, mortals. Creation gods are the two beings that created all of existence, and the elder gods. Elder gods are the gods that were created before the Great War, also known as the Godwake. All except few were killed. Elemental goddesses were created by the remaining elder gods to protect the elements from total destruction and chaos. Prime gods are almost all non-elemental gods, with them either ascending from mortals or being created by higher or lower forces. Fraction gods, or fractured parts of elemental gods, note the emotion gods. They were once one being, but they were all fractured. Guardians are massive beings that protect lesser beings. They all have an astral or an arcane form alongside a much smaller physical form. The physical form always resembles that which they're made to guard. Spirits are tiny elemental/item beings that manifest in spaces where divine/arcane energy and elements/items come into contact for long periods of time. Omega beings are mortals that possess vast amounts of divine energy. They are born and are physically identical to mortals, except they possess abnormally high levels of various physical/non-physical traits, like vis capacity or higher level powers, and they cannot be seen by gods. Mortals do not know of their existence. And finally, mortals, the rest of all living creatures. Nice. I have a little, kind of a bit of a progression fiction or, an anime isekai or power scaling kind of level here of, all the way from mortal. And there's like 9 plus sort of orders to power. Always fun stuff to have. That brings us to the end of the prompts, but now we have our Hammer Spark section, our first come, first serve area where people can submit something for any kind of writing pertaining to really anything at all. There's really no holds barred here besides the general rules about some more explicit content. Promo the Great writes, Dreadnoughts, an entry in What Lies West. Not all monsters are born of the West. Many, of course, but some are made by man, set loose on hundreds by man, and then discarded to rot by man. Dread those whose war horns drown out musket fire most, for their fire burns hottest. Marcus Crawler, Adventurer. Dreadnoughts are, or rather were, constructs designed by the elves of Moradesh. Dreadnoughts are infamous for their deployment during Iridine Thaddeus' war to conquer Koros, during which times they crashed through castle walls and cut apart hundreds of defenders. While their use during the war was short, the destruction they caused tore apart hundreds, perhaps thousands of families, and paved the path for Iridine's road to utter domination. Dreadnoughts are comprised of dense metallic shell capable of deflecting even musket fire. At their core rests a pyromantic furnace that allows them to become animated. Complex gears give them articulation, and a mind of cunning directives gives them purpose. The dreadnoughts served as Iridine's frontline shock troops, soaking up damage so his weaker infantry could make it behind enemy lines during a charge. 3/4 of the way through the war, Iridine was forced to demilitarize many dreadnoughts, as the cost of their upkeep far outweighed the gains of his war by the end. In its final days, only 13 dreadnoughts were kept up and running before all being scrapped to recover resource losses after the war. When the Orc Revolution began and the Crestronites and Ogres joined the war, Iradine ordered the construction of 30 dreadnoughts to deal with the Crestron threat. The dreadnoughts were said to have destroyed nearly everything within their borders, with many walled cities reduced to cinders when the lone dreadnoughts passed through. Even after the Revolution's end, without the ability to track and disable them, these same dreadnoughts continued to operate off the fuel they claimed by burning carcasses and homes in their furnaces. To this day, well over 100 years later, Crestonites fear that at any moment a lone iron beast will come to their home and rend it unto ashes. There's something deeply morbid, yet also compelling about single metal man-made objects capable of just decimating any number of less civilized or less technologically advanced forces. It's so dark, but man, is there something just... There's like an attraction to this kind of thing that I don't quite understand. Maybe it's something messed up in our culture, but it's well written and I enjoyed reading it. Bulbman 5000 writes, Fungora, denizens of the deep. The Fungora, mycelial denizens of the deep. Fungal creatures residing in an ancient place called the Deep, a gargantuan planet-wide subterranean forest in the planet's mantle. The Fungora evolved from cap mushrooms originally growing near the bases of surface trees. They now stand as quadrupedal sentient fungi using 4 small legs for locomotion akin to a spider's movement. Roughly a foot below their cap, they also have 4 arms measuring mere inches longer than their legs. They approximately measure at an average of 5 feet tall and 150 pounds in weight with an average lifespan of 80 years. The mycelium network of the Fungora's ancestors evolved to separate the network into individuals, allowing for typical sentience/sapience as they learned to use tools and unified planning to defend their primary mycelium network, with the original mycelium of the mushrooms themselves evolving into a nervous system and brain for each Fungora individual. The mycelium network of the Fungora is their true home, acting as their replacement for sleep. Every 18 hours, they connect back to the primary mycelium network. During this 5 to 6 hour period, Fungora remain neurologically active for the duration of their rest, usually processing what has happened during their active hours or planning future activities. If multiple Fungora are resting in the same network, they tend to connect and interact within the network. This allows them to speak to one another with a rudimentary telepathy. If there is no mycelial network present for Fungora to connect to and rest within, they will start searching for the nearest suitable terrain and root themselves into it, spreading their own nervous system mycelium into the ground and slowly building their own mycelium network from what was previously their nerves. This process is amongst them called rooting and is often painless for them, but energy taxing. Fungora feed upon decaying materials, predominantly wood or any mulch they can make. This makes their feeding habits often off-putting for other species. Fungora also evolved vocal cords and a rudimentary mouth for speech due to needing to communicate with other individuals beyond their network or arm's reach. If alone, Fungora rarely use auditory communication, tending towards waiting to connect to the mycelium network to communicate. Their cap's edge is lined with small eyes, allowing them a surprising field of view. Fungora society is rooted in their following of the Deep's goddess, the Worm Mother. Long ago, ancient Fungora were once saved by the Worm Mother in a time of great catastrophe, leading to them worshipping her to a small degree, but predominantly showing their faith by tending to creatures and plant life they encounter. Fungora are genderless, as their reproduction is based on releasing spores onto mulch connected to mycelium, growing their offspring initially from this mulch. Once matured, Fungora leave the mulch pile they grew up from and wandering about on their new legs with guidance from their initial guardians. I like these little mushroom guys. I love mycelium stuff. We have a few different settings in the community that have this kind of focus, and this is a really cool idea for this race. I really like the mycelium network stuff was well thought out, and I liked just the simple details, but the compelling details of them constructing their own new networks when there isn't one nearby, and them sort of having a sense for these things that maybe is a little unexplainable, but also kind of in line with what we know IRL about things like mushrooms and fungus. For our last entry of World Hammer Episode 12, Add-on Caffiene, or Feisty 0007 writes, Paranatural Healing, a double-edged sword. This was for an old prompt, day 438, which was, are there any cure-alls in your setting? Do they work? And this comes from Pro and the Great in the Discord. Feisty also notes at the top, moved from world build and edited. Turned out longer than I expected, so hopefully few errors still are there. Keep note, italicized font is MC's inner monologue. It does play into gore and medical stuff and the legends surrounding wraiths, and the book MC is reading from is severely outdated and slightly biased but has relevant info. The proper entry begins now. He stumbled toward the bookshelf, trying to find the cure for the poison thrumming through his stab wound. He's been holed up in the abandoned apothecarist's geology enthusiasts, at least he thought was an enthusiast since there were showcases of gems lining a few walls, for a couple of days already. Why is it I can survive the most fatal of injuries, yet this red crystal can leave me comatose for a month? Scanning the shelf, he finally found the book he was looking for, the Royal Encyclopedia of Paranatural Minerals and Flora, circa 1820. It's an outdated book, given over the past 2 centuries there's been more things found and newer discoveries like targenazine and semi-complete explanation of aether realms and the crystals, but this will need to suffice. This originally came from the Fey realm and proves so since the development gap between humans and the rest of the supernatural was stark back then. Despite that, it was a thick book, larger than the first Lord of the Rings book. It was drilled into him to remember as much as he could from those books for survival. He knew there was a specific mineral that can cure this, but the last month or so of stress wore down on remembering the fine details. He regretted not bringing Johnny along with him to find this, as he almost fell with the book trying to lift it from the shelf with only one functioning arm. Struggling to have the book onto the dust-covered workbench, he took a moment to let the dust settle, thanking whatever deity he didn't believe in for making sure his mask stayed intact through that last encounter so he didn't suffocate on the dust. He began to flip through the book, searching through dozens of ancient mineral breakdowns till he found the one. Paranatural minerals used in healing. What can heal one could possibly be poison for another. Paranatural minerals used in healing. What can heal one could possibly be poison for another. He read, despite feeling the throb in his muscle, a telltale sign his muscle is starting to be shredded due to the sharding effect. The pages followed as so. Page 1. Atotixa, lifeblood of the eldritch, poison of the eldritch. Atotixa, an ancient mineral that can be found in 2 forms, liquid or crystalline. Used commonly as a healing medicine without any side effects to the recipient, it is considered the best cure-all and is constantly sought out across the realms. Can be seen in 2 colors, obsidian black, the most common color, or starlight white, rarest type and the strongest. It is often mistaken for oil in common form, but is commonly differentiated as a pearlescent indigo shine found in it where the light reacts with it. When in extreme heat or cold or under pressure of force, can become crystalline through non-Newtonian theory. Atotixa is one of the few rare paranatural minerals that is also found being produced within a living body. See also Stellanos opie. But it is very difficult to come across. Only 2 things can produce Atotixa: ancient draconic fossils, more commonly ones found in oceanic ruins or as part of the blood component of wraiths. To understand Atotixa, it is needed to understand the living entity that can produce it. Page 2 through 4, Wraiths and their connection to Atotixa. Wraiths are a subspecies of paranatural, most commonly a result of an entity being killed or on the verge of death transforming to survive. It was most commonly found amongst mortal species like dwarves, gnomes, etc., but can happen to immortal species as well like draconic. With the Wraith subspecies, it seems more stable among dragonic entities and magic users over non-magic inclined humans. Statistics or Wraith attacks are lower to those recipients than the humans who do not practice. One pertinent theory is in 2 parts. 1. From the dragonic side, it was rumored the first Wraith was supposedly a dragon, yet the Basilisk and the Eldritch of Balance won't confirm it due to strained relations between Fae and dragons at the current century. 2. It is more stable to recipients that have a better understanding of magic and abilities and are able to accept it easier than the common magic-fearing human. If the former owner of this cottage had the latest addition, it would have proved correct that it did stem from a dragon species and was more stable among magic communities. Death himself requested to use similar abilities for unfortunate people who needed a second chance. No wonder it wasn't fully confirmed due to the 250-year tension between the 2 factions, since the Fae tended to wage war on anything that wasn't Fae. Once they transform, they keep the physical attributes of their primary genus. Think dragon or human as primary genus. For 2 of the 3 classes of it, it can only be noticeable once said entity becomes emotionally unregulated, sleep-deprived, and or overexerting themselves with the abilities. It is commonly seen in black spiraling veins going along their arms, around their eyes, necks, directly above their hearts, and across the calves, and wispy smoke trails when they move. Ways transformation can commonly happen by extreme emotions while in their final moments, in a grave or areas of final rest, commonly of revenge, rage, hope for other safety, etc. A harbinger mistakenly killing them and trying to reward them with renewed life. Genetics. One or both parents carry a recessive gene of wraithism, and a near-death stressor tends to bring it out. And finally, one taking a fatal blow in a selfless act to save someone else, either knowingly or unknowingly, and left in a grave or areas of final rest. Can tend to happen in morgues as well, and a harbinger grants them a second chance. There are 3 subclasses of wraiths: common, corrupted, and guardian. Wraiths can use the autotyxa in their bloodstream through bloodletting or concentrating it into mist and reforming it back into liquid or crystalline. It can be used both in IV or orally, unaltered unlike the rest in this section, as it is a blood component mineral. The flavor tends to be like a soft caramel with a hint of mint, with a sharp tone of an espresso that melds well with its unique flavor. In crystalline form, on the Mohs scale rates at a 10 and is quite difficult to break or reshape without the help of a wraith. In recent studies, it was shown that it can be a good blood replacement as it does not contain any markers that would cause issues. Think of it like how O negative is compatible with all blood types, and would not cause a genetic change to becoming a wraith unless the recipient too had a dormant wraith gene. The types of wraith start with common being when the entity first regains a heartbeat. It also tends to be the one that is the most seen and least dangerous besides the first couple months when they learn their abilities. They are effectively immortal. When taking fatal hits, their spirits are sent to purgatory while their bodies slowly regenerate. Corrupted being a common yet uncommon subclass of wraith where while in their final moments they were consumed with rage and revenge. This subclass is sometimes mistaken for firewalkers. Main difference is that they will actively use their blood as a flammable due to there being a high concentration of autotyxa. When the transformation starts, they begin to start burning up, not keeping any of their primary genus attributes, except horns, wings, or tails tend to stay relatively untouched, yet burned looking. Commonly, when a harbinger comes across one, they can't calm them to stop them in their destructive frenzy. They act as if they are in a hive mind. Only one thought is known: kill anything living, destroy anything living. They are pseudo-immortal, meaning they only stay alive as long as their burning core is alight. It is highly advised to corral them to a water-rich area to effectively handle them. Finally, guardian wraiths, commonly thought of as the angelic wraiths. These wraiths start as common as well, but through their actions, pre- and post-death lives, as they continually acted as the sword and shield for people in dangerous situations, they transformed into something else. Not something pure, no, but something considered akin to a royal abyssal demon relative, an angelic-looking being with demonic features, fire, both spectral and organic abilities, horns, healing, feathered wings, yet have a grounded, kind-hearted, and protective nature rather than the posh, strict, judgmental nature of true angels. It is to note, it is theorized that they were based on them, but no evidence can suggest that outside of the Eldritch of Balance and Harmony and her testimony on how the first wraith was made in the image of an ancient dragonic species by Death themselves. Their autotyxa can be concentrated into the starlight white color, but it would take heavy amount of effort to synthesize, so they normally tend to keep it the common obsidian black. How is autotyxa a blood component of wraiths? From the book written by the Eldritch of Balance and Harmony, When Death Needs a Living Healer and Solidor, circa 1650, it is said that the autotyxa was originally a blood component of that species Death based it on. It is theorized it was a dragon since the book was written as a tale chant, and the Fae didn't have access to the newly updated book due to strained relations. As the Eldritch put it, it was a common component like iron is in human blood. It seemed to be a foundational and only mineral in the blood composition as it acted as a healing and structural component. It doesn't change the viscosity of the blood or its color, though in higher concentration, it will turn it the trademark obsidian black with the pearl indigo shine. If you siphon the autotyxa from the blood, all you'd be left with is the erythrocytes, red blood cells, leukocytes, white blood cells, and plasma. When returning the blood to the wraith, it would leave them in an anemic state, or something near anemic, as their blood doesn't even contain iron anymore post-wraith transformation. Autotyxa was scientifically found that it can cure near anything: physical injuries, broken bones, fatal injuries, diseases, illness, pain, and chronic pain. Death within an hour or so of it happening for both mortal and conventional immortal. Think Fae with their weakness to iron and Greek gods and their ambrosia, as this was also a specific context it was used as Zeus and acted out again and finally paid for it. Though in finding it can't help with mental illness, but other paranatural flora can help it in tandem. As most paramaterials, this too is a double-edged blade. While yes, this can heal and doesn't cause issues to patients, there is a price to pay for this type of healing. Wraiths pay this price as it can cause extreme pain, but only if it is in high concentrations in their bloodstream. It can cause, with high concentrations, muscle weakness, severe body aches, severe chills, or fevers, fatigue, drowsiness, dizziness, and a few more. All side effects last for as long as the overconcentration lasts, days, and in worst cases, weeks. The only way to cure them of this blight was either letting it naturally return to normal levels or siphoning. Due to this, wraiths commonly willingly donate autotyxa to blood banks for use in hospitals, clinics, and on the battlefield. Yeah, I'm cursed to live as this and act as a free ATM for life-saving medicine when the medics forget to pack the backup vials. Autotyxa can be combined with several other. 3 others are known as publishing, and 2 of them are prevalent to this section. Note the next one is advised not to mix with autotyxa. lest you want to end up with corpses instead of healthy patients. Page 5 to 6. Other healing minerals that can combine with Autotyxa and the effects. Stolanos opi primarily is found in crystalline form from the Stolanani plant. It is also a paranatural mineral found in living beings, plants only. The crystals can be melted in 1000 degrees Celsius fire to melt into a liquid. Cooling slowly and adding a saline or a simple syrup solution would keep it liquid even when it fully cools. This is the aforementioned mineral that is advised not to mix with Autotyxa, as fatal results were found in the studies. The Stolanani plant is a common plant found throughout Europe and Northern America. It looks almost identical to the Juneberry plant, commonly known as serviceberry and Saskatoonberry, but the only difference is the berries are a bright, glowing cherry red, and surrounding the plant is jagged, sharp, brittle crimson crystals jutting up from the soil, as if it were always meant to be there among the plants. While it is also a healing mineral, it doesn't have the same strength as, say, Autotyxa or angelite, but still effective nonetheless. It is preferred in the liquid form for use orally, simple syrup solution, or IV, saline. It is also an effective mineral to boost plant growth, surprisingly, so it can be seen used more in the horticultural scene. So why is it highly advised not to mix with Autotyxa? When the two minerals mix, it causes a sharding effect while in both types of form. Sharding means recrystallization, but in a much more rapid and violent manner. In studies, it showed that stolanos bind to the Autotyxa chemical, make up and act as a multiplicative nullifying binder, meaning that it binds to the organic compounds and nullifies the magical ability, including healing, and causes overproduction of Autotyxa and stolanos, in an unfortunate side effect as a repetitive, destructive cycle. This proves dangerous for wraiths and patients, giving Autotyxa, as the longer it is built up in their system, the longer and more drastic healing and recovery will be. The sharding effect has caused severe lacerations to vital organs, blood vessels, and muscle tissue, and in mortals tends to prove fatal. The shards were made a popular warding material in the Renaissance era and is commonly used by hunters, believing it would affect other species as well. It would do the opposite and heal them, causes them to grow weak and symptoms of other extortion from Autotyxa, and causes a red glow to their marks. Without the healing ability, wraith regeneration is severely impacted and will take long until it is either siphoned out through their body naturally or siphoned and filtered out of the Autotyxa in an out-of-body machine similar to dialysis. Surprisingly, the berries don't have the sharding effect on wraiths. Reasons why are still unknown. Only reaction it causes is glowing red marks if the primary genus has marks. It is not known why this reaction happens, though it is theorized it is something similar to blood type mixing, causing clotting, or an evolutionary weakness built in by life itself to, quote, keep death's unfortunate creations in check. Note, life and death, while being perfect equals and perfect opposites and are constantly in tension with one another, life being the aggressor whilst death being the peaceful one. Of course I'm stabbed with the one thing designed to keep me in check. Makes sense why Johnny had me in a tiny vial as a lantern, still not sure how. Why and how did this become the common use medicine? Angelite, one of the more mysterious minerals, where origins isn't exactly known. It is commonly found naturally in crystalline form. It tends to grow wherever ancient and or sacred sites tend it reside. It also tends to grow in forests in rich, heavy growth density with animals and a balanced ecosystem. It is a white crystalline structure, seems to be the most stable of the entire section. It can be given orally or IV, similar to stolanos, yet has twice the strength of it. Angelite is labeled as the hangover cure for both medicines of natural and paranatural types. It can both heal and also be used in tandem with others to remove the side effects of others or reverses adverse effects, sharding effect with stolanos and Autotyxa, and addictive side effects of human medicines. This is also a common mineral to find for use in medicine. He stopped reading as he finally found a cure to his current predicament. He slowly moved to the shelves lined with tinctures and oils, taking slow steps as he began to feel lightheaded from the blood loss. He found the vial he was looking for, a pearlescent liquid labeled Angelite syrup solution. He grabbed a couple, one to heal his shoulder, the others for injuries he knows he'll incur later on. He sat on the floor against the counter, popped the vial lid, and downed the contents. He let the sweet, honey-like taste fill his mouth before he focused on the second task at hand for this to actually work. He could feel it working already. The tight, needle-sharp pain of the sharding effect slowly erodes away back into the dull blade the blonde Texan smugly used on him that morning. He pulled the knife out and tended to his wound. If there was an old sailor spirit present, they'd blush at the colorful adjectives used to describe his pain. He let his head flop back against the wooden counter, letting the haze of pain and healing fill his senses. the red angered coloring on his mark slowly fading to gray, still too concentrated to be considered cured, but enough to rest till maybe morning. He couldn't wait to head back to base and flop onto his bunk and conk out for at least a couple days to forget this entire event. Interesting. So our main character here appears to be a wraith and is reading a textbook about sort of the different substances used for cures because they know there's something in this book that will likely help them, and they have to kind of get through a chunk of it before they find something useful. Kind of a cool premise. I stumbled a little bit on some of the prose. Might be good to have another cursory look over some of this. And hopefully I didn't stumble too much to the point of kind of destroying the listenability. I do apologize if that was the case, but it was an interesting entry. Lots of cool stuff nodded at that we don't know too much about yet. So that does bring us to the end of World Hammer episode 12. Thank you for listening. Please rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The more people that we can share all this pretty amazing world building and writing with, the better. We will see you next time, and may your world never be lost in the fires of the forge of the World Hammer.